It's gbnews.com/your say. But before we kick off the next 3 hours of pageantry and pomp, here's your headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you just after 3 o'clock. Well, the King has welcomed French President Emmanuel Macron to the UK for his 3-day state visit, starting with a ceremony at Windsor Castle. The Prince and Princess of Wales greeted the President and his wife as their plane landed at RAF Northolt, and King Charles and Queen Camilla then welcomed them both to Windsor. It's the first UK state visit by a French president since 2008. His Majesty says the UK and France both face complex threats, adding that the challenges the two countries face, quote, know no borders. At a summit on Thursday this week between the two countries, immigration is set to be the centrepiece, as Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer aims to get a one-in, one-out migrant returns deal with France over the line. A state banquet at Windsor Castle will also take place later this evening, while President Macron will also address Parliament. In other news this hour, the first volume of the final report into the Post Office Horizon scandal has been published, concluding that at least 13 postmasters may have taken their own lives. More than 900 sub-postmasters were wrongfully prosecuted by the Post Office between 1999 and 2015 in what has been labelled the worst miscarriage of justice in British legal history. The first part of that report, published today, also found that 59 postmasters considered ending their own lives. Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says that he welcomed the republication of that report and that he is committed to ensuring wronged sub-postmasters are given full, fair and prompt redress. Chairman of the inquiry, Sir Wyn Williams, summarised his findings.
As I have said once already, but I repeat, the picture which has emerged and which is described in my report is profoundly disturbing. In summary, what does that picture reveal? Many thousands of people have suffered serious financial detriment, and for a sizable proportion, that detriment subsists. Many people have inevitably suffered emotional turmoil and significant stress in consequence.
Junior doctors in England have voted in favour of taking strike action over a pay dispute, according to the British Medical Association. Resident doctors, otherwise known as junior doctors, are seeking a 29% pay rise. There are fears that the industrial action will now cause prolonged disruption in the NHS, with walkouts potentially lasting until January of next year. Number 10, though, said this lunchtime resident doctors have already had almost 29% pay rise over the past 3 years, adding that it was disappointing that they want to strike. The Prime Minister's thoughts are with the family of Lord Tebbit, who was a major figure in British politics and will be missed by many, Downing Street have said today. Lord Tebbit, formerly Conservative Party chairman and cabinet minister under Margaret Thatcher, died peacefully yesterday evening. He was first elected as Conservative MP for Epping in 1970, before going on to enter the House of Lords in 1992. In a statement, his son William said the family asked for their privacy to be respected at this time. Well, Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch has paid tribute to the late politician.
Conservative family is mourning Lord Tebbit's loss. He was an icon. We respected him for so many reasons. The battles he fought during the Thatcher government, but probably the most inspiring thing was watching the aftermath of the 1984 Brighton bomb and how he responded to a terrorist attack from the IRA. Just staying stoic, staying brave, showing lots of courage, but most importantly, looking after his wife, who was severely disabled from that terrorist attack. He put family first. He always exemplified personal responsibility. He was the embodiment of what a Conservative should be, and we're going to miss him very much.
Kemi Badenoch there speaking earlier. And the chairman of Marks & Spencer said that the cyber attack on their company involved sophisticated impersonation, adding that the business is still in rebuild mode. Chairman Archie Norman spoke to the Business and Trade Committee today, although he declined to say whether the company had paid a ransom over that attack. Marks & Spencer's online operation was disrupted for 6 weeks in April and in May. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back in half an hour. Martin next, but first, the markets.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's how the markets are shaping up this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.3577 and €1.1586. The price of gold, £2,449.66 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,817 points.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Thank you, Sam. Let's get cracking on today's show, because today Britain is rolling out the royal red carpet for the French President Emmanuel Macron as he enjoys a full state visit with all the bells and whistles. Now, Mr. Macron is the first European leader to get the full treatment since Brexit. Brexit, you recall, he said was based on a lie. Well, will the Entente Cordiale be strengthened or will it be weakened by this visit? We'll be live for all of this throughout the entire show. And we begin by speaking with GB News' war correspondent Cameron Walker, who is outside Windsor Castle. Cameron, the scene so far, majestic, the weather majestic. Tell us, what's the latest?
Yeah, I mean, the British weather has been very kind, I think, to President Macron when he arrived at RAF Northolt Martin earlier this morning alongside his wife, Brigitte. Macron, greeted by the Prince and Princess of Wales and a number of officially welcomed even by a number of dignitaries. They then travelled here to Windsor, to Datchet Road. A specially built dais was built, and the King and Queen were upon it, and the national anthems were played. We had the pomp, we had the pageantry, we had all the military bands marching up and down Windsor High Street. And then, of course, the King invited the President to take a little carriage ride through the streets of Windsor to the cheering crowds, and the streets were decked out in Union flags and French flags as well. The Prince and Princess of Wales in a separate carriage, and the Queen and Brigitte Macron in another carriage as well. They then came up the long walk to the upper ward of the castle, to the quadrangle, where the President was invited to inspect a guard of honour, Martin. And the President walked in front of the King, as is custom, we're led to believe. And if you may remember, about 5 or 6 years ago now, during President Trump's first term of office, he was heavily criticised for walking in front of Queen Elizabeth II. Well, President Macron of France just walked in front of King Charles III, so make of that what you will. President Macron has just had a private lunch alongside the King and Queen, and he has also just viewed a number of items from the royal collection to do with France, including a golden snuff box inside the green drawing room, which once belonged to Marie Antoinette, the last Queen of France, who was guillotined in 1793, perhaps suggesting or at least signifying some of that shared history between Britain and France, and perhaps where some of those items of the fallen French monarchy went. It ended up in the Royal Collection in the Royal Archives here at Windsor Castle. President Macron and Brigitte Macron will then travel to London this afternoon. They will be laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. President Macron will also visit the Palace of Westminster, will meet politicians, including members of Parliament, members of the House of Lords. He is also going to be meeting Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party leader, and Sir Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat leader. He is not scheduled to meet Nigel Farage, a leader of Reform UK, in Lancaster House alongside other opposition leaders. As far as we understand it, it's just going to be Kemi Badenoch and Sir Ed Davey. But then after that, President Macron and Brigitte Macron will be back here for the state banquet inside St George's Hall, a 50-metre table. Around 160 guests we're expecting. The King is expected to stress in his speech the vital partnership between the UK and France and its multitude of complex threats that we share, and highlighting how these challenges know no borders, no fortress can protect us against them this time. Now, the word border, I think, highlighted a few perhaps alarm bells, but royal sources are keen to stress that the King is not going to specifically refer to the migrant channel crossings, the channel crossings crisis, I should say. Instead, the King is expected to refer to joint ties between technology, defence and climate change as well. So we'll wait and see exactly what is in that speech scheduled for later on today, and we are expected to bring that to you live on GB News tonight.
Okay, Cameron Walker, an excellent summary there, and already people are saying perhaps the King has put his foot in it by saying that no borders comment. Loads to discuss. Cameron Walker, beautiful stuff. Talking politics, let's speak with our GB News political editor, Chris Hope. Now, Chris, welcome to the show on this historic day, a royal visit. It's meant to be, Chris, apolitical. Let's face it, mate. It's been the most political state visit I can remember in my entire life already. Yesterday, a snub for Nigel Farage. Today, the King saying there'll be no borders between France and Britain on a day when our own president, our own prime minister, hopes to get a deal strengthening borders between our countries. It's pure politics.
Hi, Marty. Yeah, welcome to College Green. I'm a few hundred feet away from where President Macron will be after 4 o'clock, addressing both houses of Parliament in what's called the Royal Gallery. Yes, you are right. No question people are reading into that line on borders in what the King will say tonight, as Cameron Walker was saying there, in that dinner in St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. We are told by number 10 Downing Street today that there was no, they won't tell us, I should say, on whether it was consulted on the language used, or indeed whether the Prime Minister agrees with what the King said. There's no comment on that. What they will say is the government's position on the need for action on small boat crossings over the next few days. Will see the strength of their growing relationship between Emmanuel Macron and Sir Keir Starmer with the French government, and that's what we're committed to. Clearly, the issue of small boat crossings matters a lot to voters. It ranks alongside the economy. Half of voters care about it. It's right up there, and the UK wants the French to start helping. Just stabbing, frankly, with knives one boat for the TV cameras last Friday is not a strategy. We've given them hundreds of billions of pounds to try and millions of pounds, urging them to try and sort this problem out. Let's see the return on that investment. I think that's the message that we hope the UK government might give to France today.
Of course, Chris Hope, what with Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, Brexit is on the menu. And of course, Emmanuel Macron said famously Brexit was based on a lie. He was contemptuous of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. And he said again, the visit is to strengthen ties with the European Union and the United Kingdom. That's a powerful message to send out. Again, Chris, I put it to you, this is the most political royal visit in living memory.
I mean, everything is politics, Martin. The King almost goes above that. He recognises that we are basically the same size country, same size populations, same size economy, give or take a few billion here and there. We are the nearest neighbouring country. We, of course, they're part of the G7, so are we. They're on the UN Security Council, so are we. There is more that unites us than divides us. And the King, I mean, I'm not talking for him, but clearly the King can be above the everyday politics. Yes, he did say things in the past on Brexit. That was 8 years ago, Martin. I know it's hard to remember that. 8 years since Brexit happened, and maybe it's time to move on. That's the sense I get, certainly, from the tone of this visit. I should say, by the way, look closely on GB News later when President Macron addresses MPs and peers in the Royal Gallery, because when Charles de Gaulle came here in 1960, tapestries were used to cover up paintings of Waterloo and Trafalgar, those famous British victories. So let's see whether we're trying to spare President Macron's blushes a bit later on GB News.
OK, Chris, beautiful stuff. You're doing your very best there to make out Brexit no longer matters. It matters. It matters to all of us. It matters perhaps to me more than most, Chris Hope. But look, beautiful stuff. Speak to you throughout the show. Chris Hope there, right in the thick of it. Let's get back to studio. My special studio guest for the next 3 hours. Delighted to introduce the constitutional expert, the historian, the biographer, Alexander Larman. Alexander, welcome to the studio. It's a pleasure to have your company for the next 3 hours. Let me ask you a blunt question. What's the point of royal state visits? What is Britain hoping hoping to get out of this? And more to the point, what is Emmanuel Macron?
Well, Martin, as ever, there's for text and there's for subtext. The text is that this is going to be a meeting that's going to be bringing about the entente cordiale. It's going to be bringing about stronger links between Britain and France. The subtext is that, as you say, this is the most political state visit imaginable, because we have the king, who is clearly a Francophile. He's clearly somebody who has a bromance going on with Macron. I mean, if you saw, there was the backslapping and the arm touching and things like that. And there's clearly a very good relationship between the two men. But always talk about there being no borders between France and Britain that the king's going to say in his speech tonight. It's very loaded language, isn't it? Because, as we all know, if you've got all these people coming over on the small boats day in, day out, no borders is a very specific use of language, because obviously bear in mind that any speech that the king delivers, and especially in such a high-profile occasion as this, that speech is not something that's just off-the-cuff improvisation. That will have been worked over, that will have had people go over it for days, weeks, possibly even months, because this has been a highly anticipated state visit. So what we can see, essentially, as with the king's meeting with Zelensky, as with everything he's done up to now, is he is the most political of monarchs. And this state visit, possibly even more so than the Donald Trump state visit later in the year, has the king's personal signature upon it. I mean, the clips we were just seeing about Macron being shown the memorabilia, the Marie Antoinette material, that would have been the king saying, let's do this and let's do that. That's not coming from Starmer, a man of no historical interest whatsoever. This is his own decision, because he knows Macron. Met him dozens of times. He's known him since he was Prince of Wales. The two men have this rapport together. So we can see today that this is essentially one for him, just as the Donald Trump statement is one for them. But the question that you have to ask is, what does the king want to get out of it himself? Because he's been hoping that Macron shares his environmental views, and he's hoping that there's going to be some kind of movement on things like climate change and that crisis. But it's really interesting, because what we all know about His Majesty is that he is the possessor of an enormous amount of soft power, possibly more so than anyone else in the country, that he has no constitutional power, but he's able to go around and say, well, I don't like this, I don't like that. And he's listened to, because he's the king. And so today, we're really going to see the limits of how far he can stretch that, just how far his hosting of Macron, his being front and centre all day. Because a lot of people, I mean, if you knew nothing about the country and you turned into for television right now, you'd think that the king was like the president in America, with Starmer as this diminished and rather small figure, and maybe there's something in that.
Do you think, Alexander, I'm being a tad harsh when I'm saying perhaps it's not the best thing for the king to say by having such words as there will be no borders between Britain and France? So he might mean that in a way that resonates well with his social circle, with the intelligentsia, with the Church of England, with the wokerati, call them what you want. But there has been a substantial backlash today from the great British public. And I wonder if comments like this, they may be meant in passing, they may be well meant, but they've landed pretty badly.
But it's a very deliberate use of language. I mean, no borders. That is talking about the open EU. That is talking about this utopia where people could be going from one country to another in the Schengen way. And of course, as we know, this has led to absolute chaos when it comes to immigration. This has led to absolute chaos when it comes to freedom of movement. And so for the king to be saying, let's have no borders between us and France, I mean, well, I was wondering as well, Your Majesty, you've got some spare rooms in Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. Do you fancy taking in a few illegal immigrants and seeing how all that goes? Great
stuff, Alexander Lorman. A spicy start to the show, and so much more to go through in the next few hours. Of course, that historic visit to Westminster Abbey, addressing Parliament, the wreath laying at the statue of Sir Winston Churchill, and out of that of the statue of General Charles de Gaulle. We're with you throughout the rest of the show. Please stay tuned. But in the meantime, there's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far, an incredible £54,321, all tax-free. These are the details you need for your chance to make it yours.
You have the chance to win our biggest cash prize to date in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As there's an incredible £54,321 in tax-free cash to be won. What would you spend it on? A brand new car, the holiday of a lifetime, or just the chance to sit back, relax, and remove some of those day-to-day financial stresses? £54,321 in tax-free cash has to be won. For another chance to win win £54,321 cash. Text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB14 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 1st of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Now, coming up, plenty more reaction to the French president's state visit to the UK. We'll be crossing to France for their prospective next. Guess what? Emmanuel Macron having the time of his life in Windsor. Meanwhile, back in France, his popularity is at an all-time low. That's next with me, Martin Daubney, on GB News, Britain's news channel.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Dubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience, because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints. How many fingers have I got up?
About 10.
So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m. only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:26 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, returning to our top story, that, of course, is the state visit of President Macron to the UK. On top of Sir Keir Starmer's wish list is to cement his one-in, one-out deal with France to help curb spiralling illegal immigration. But with 6 other EU member states already crying no, is the deal already dead in the water? Well, let's speak now with the Eurosceptic activist Charles-Henri Gaulois, the man they call Monsieur Frexit, great friend of yours. Charles-Henri, superb to see you. I wanted to ask you what the French public's reaction is to this visit, and more to the point, How popular or not is Emmanuel Macron right now with the French public?
I mean, you just check the polls and you know that Macron is not very popular in France, isn't it? So I think it's not that, let's say, broadcast in France because Macron has no more credibility, I mean, at home, so his own choices and his own way now is to do travel the world and to do international politics because the French people cannot stand in anymore. So he, as you can see in all the files in Iran, Ukraine, he tried to do everything he can to exist, but most of the time he's more doing the comments of the decision Donald Trump has taken. So I don't know what you should expect from the visit because he has not the power anymore in France. And if you talk about, let's say, immigration, which is the main issue we may have between the UK and France, Macron is pro-immigration. I mean, in France, since he has taken office, the numbers have increased by 100,000 people per year. So now it's only 500,000 people coming to France each year, which is huge, and which is numbers that have never been achieved. And I mean, on that way, and the fact that Macron is not willing to meet Nigel Farage, maybe it's a good thing for Nigel because he wants, let's say, he won't waste time with him. I mean, it's a lack of vision because all the polls show that Nigel may be the next prime minister in the UK. And even if Macron, thanks God, won't be here in 2029, if you have some vision and you want to think and to talk about the future, it will have been a good thing to meet Nigel and to talk indeed about immigration. But you see that Macron is just here to take some lights, but not to solve issues.
And Charles-Henri, the latest polling I've seen shows that only 3% of the French electorate are very satisfied with Emmanuel Macron, 18% quite satisfied, so 21% of the voters in France are in any way satisfied with Macron, as opposed to 44% very dissatisfied, 35% quite dissatisfied. Can I ask you, in as far as the prospect of doing a deal with Britain, this one-in, one-out deal, do you think Emmanuel Macron has any interest in stopping immigration into Britain? If immigration into France is such a problem for him, why should he care about stopping illegal immigrants coming to our shores?
I mean, I don't think that he will do it, and he's pro-immigration in France, so I don't know why he would be against immigration for the UK. And mainly, even if he has, let's say, a God thing that can change his mind. Let's say that now he has no the power anymore. He has no majority in the parliament. So even if he has a deal, it's not necessarily a deal that will be applied by the parliament. So that's why now he has no power at home, no credibility, and the 2 years coming to the next presidential election will be quite long for French people, but as well quite long for him, I think.
OK, thank you very, very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have your company, Charles-Henri Gaulois, superb voice from the other side of the channel. Back to the studio now, and I'm still joined by the constitutional expert, the author, the biographer, the historian, Alexander Lorman. Alexander, in defence of Emmanuel Macron, you do believe he's an Anglophile, he loves the United Kingdom.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. And I know that he's absolutely hated in his own country. And I mean, with my GCSE in French, I can't really say much about it. But what I can say is if you look at Macron, he has this great and sincere interest in Britain. I mean, you can see this bromance that exists between him and the king. And that's not been put on for the cameras. I mean, the two men really do connect with one another. And it's interesting that when Charles was hosted at Versailles in September 2023, Macron deliberately served the Paul Roger Cuvée Winston Churchill because he wanted to make an impression, but he also wanted to nod to Churchill. And of course, you can see this Anglophilia and deep love of the royal family is quite sincere, because when the late Queen died, I thought Macron really captured the spirit of many people not in this country, because what he said is, to you, she was your queen, to us, she was the queen. And I thought, yeah, nailed it. So, yeah, I mean, I agree he's probably an absolutely useless president in France, and I think that for the poor French people, the end probably can't come quickly enough. But on the world stage, I think he's a much more compelling and much more charismatic figure than many of his predecessors have been. So.
And, of course, worth remembering, of course, King Charles, fluent in French, and he's Francophile himself. He genuinely does care about France.
Well, that's the thing, because I think it's often seen as there's a stronger link between the British royal family and Germany, because obviously for a very long time, members of the British royal family spoke German. They had the common ancestry with the Germans. But with Charles, it's clear that it's not Germany he looks to, it's France, because I think he's a man of culture and sophistication. He's also an adulterer, so those things have obviously gone together. So.
OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Alexander Lorman. No, plenty coming up. Coming up, plenty more reaction to the French president's state visit as he is set to speak to MPs in Parliament in around about, I believe, 45 minutes' time. But what might he say? All eyes on that. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. The headlines from the newsroom at this hour. French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife have arrived in the UK for their three-day state visit. The King and Queen welcomed them to Windsor earlier. The first volume of the final report into the Post Office Horizon scandal has been published, including that at least 13 sub-postmasters may have taken their own lives. Junior doctors in England have voted in favour of taking strike action over a pay dispute. The British Medical Association made the announcement earlier. Former Conservative Party chairman and cabinet minister under Margaret Thatcher, Norman Tebbit, has died at the age of 94. Tory party leader Kemi Badenoch has paid tribute.
He was the embodiment of what a Conservative should be, and we're going to miss him very much.
And the public inquiry into the murders of 3 young girls in Southport last July has begun today, with the chairman making an opening statement in Liverpool Town Hall. Those are the latest headlines for now. More news from me at the top of the hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny and warm out there for many of us today, but it is turning cloudier from the northwest, leading to some damp weather for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland later. That's because of these weak weather fronts that are pushing in over the top of an area of high pressure, and it's that high pressure that is going to increasingly dominate the weather across the UK during the rest of the week. That's led to plenty of clear skies through the day, and we keep those clear skies through the Midlands, eastern and southern England, as well as East Wales overnight. But elsewhere, thicker cloud rolls in, and that cloud producing some spots of rain for the north and west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, North West England. Keeping the temperatures mild, 14 or 15 Celsius under the cloud, cooler towards the southeast, but that's where we'll see the best of the sunshine first thing Wednesday. Meanwhile, it's a gloomy start to the day for the north and west of Scotland. Light rain and drizzle here, especially for western coasts and hills. Northern Ireland, likewise, the north seeing spells of rain and drizzle first thing. Nothing particularly heavy, but it's going to be a damp and gloomy start. North Wales, similar, but the cloud more patchy across the north and west of England. And for the southeast, it's sunny skies. That will help the temperatures rise through the morning. It's going to be a warm day. But for much of England and Wales, as well as eastern Scotland, it does turn brighter. The cloud thins and breaks into the afternoon. I think we'll keep the thick, low cloud for the north and west of Scotland, some drizzle remaining into the afternoon here, keeping temperatures at 17 or 18 Celsius. But under the sunshine elsewhere, mid to even the high 20s are possible. So a very warm day to come for many, and it's going to turn even warmer during the next few days, with high pressure building widely, pushing weather fronts well to the north, widespread sunny skies developing by the start of the weekend. And watch how those temperatures rise. It's not just the south, but further north as well.
Crash Law 24. sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from gbnews.com. The A87 is closed at Loch Cluanie. Motorists should find alternatives. In West Sussex, an M23 southbound exit slip accident at Junction 9 closes all lanes. In Bedfordshire, M1 northbound between junctions 12 and 13 remains closed, causing up to 1-hour delays. All lanes of A49 northbound between the A438 and A4103 are shut due to a load spillage. Follow diversions. And on the trains, Avanti West Coast services are disrupted between Carlisle and Glasgow, while Gatwick Express faces delays between Haywards Heath and Brighton. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Welcome back. Time is 3:37. You're with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, a public inquiry into one of the most horrific crimes in the country's history. We saw, of course, 3 young girls stabbed to death during a dance class in Southport, has begun. The public inquiry will look at whether the attack could or should have been prevented, considering what was known about the killer, Axel Rillicabana. Well, join us now with the very latest. It's GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, a lot of people have been waiting for answers for a long time. The inquiry begins today. What's the latest?
Well, the hope is that there will be some answers about why institution after institution dealt with this man, a young man, just 13 years of age, when he was referred to the Prevent Counter-Extremism programme, not once, but 3 separate times. He was referred to social services, to the health service, to the criminal justice service, to the education department locally as well, and all just seemed to pass the buck, feeling that they couldn't deal with someone who was not just exhibiting violent tendencies, but who was assaulting fellow pupils, who had expressed a desire to emulate those horrific mass school murders that we have seen so often in the United States. Despite that, despite clearly all of these institutions being aware that this was, to say the very least, a very troubled young man, it seems that all felt that they couldn't really deal with him and that it would be better for the other agency to take on board his particular case. It was a case of the most grotesque pass the parcel with this individual till effectively nothing was done before the 31st of July last year, when he went on that absolutely horrifying stabbing spree at this Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport, killing 3 young girls, badly injuring 8 other young girls, also 2 adults, and of course traumatising 16 other young girls that were in this class.
Mark White, do we expect this inquiry to have any teeth or consequences? What I mean by that is that the families of the Vaudo Calacane deceased, they're adamant. They want individuals named, they want them shamed. If necessary, they want them fired, they want them removed from public service. Or will this be yet another lessons must be learned? And while we're at it, why don't we light a few candles?
I mean, sadly, I think even though Sir Adrian Fulford is well respected and very experienced in these matters, as often is the case when we look at these inquiries, statutory inquiries or not, when you're dealing with officials, when you're dealing with people who are not normally public-facing individuals, so their names would not normally be in the public realm, they still enjoy that level of anonymity, and I don't think anything is likely to change here. But there are many people, and quite understandably, who feel that we've reached a point now where you get inquiry after inquiry. We're going to get another one now after a lot of pressure on the government, re the horrific murders in Nottingham. That, you know, time after time after time, we get these reports that are hard-hitting that say we must learn the lessons. But there are many now who feel unless you actually name individuals that took or didn't take the appropriate decisions, and actually make them properly accountable and responsible for the actions or lack of action in whatever case, then perhaps people will never really learn, because they always have that cover of anonymity that they can hide behind.
Yeah, Mark White, I think you're absolutely right, and I wonder if people are just a bit sick of this now. They just want people to be accountable for their shortfallings, as they would be in any other walk of life, but certainly one to keep an eye on. Thank you very much, Mark White, for bringing us up to speed as ever. Now, let's get back to our main story of the day. Now, of course, it is that full royal visit, and I'm joined in the studio by the constitutional expert, the author, the biographer, Alexander Lorman. Alexander, we understand now that President Macron, the King, Prime Minister are all now in London. So they would normally take a royal helicopter right from Windsor Castle to Buckingham Palace.
Which is going to cost a lot of money, because obviously we saw the other day the royal train is going to be scrapped to save money. But it doesn't matter, because there's a royal helicopter, a royal plane, not a royal yacht anymore, but we can see there is that sort of... There's always a royal vehicle somewhere, which obviously... It's the red carpet being wheeled out for Macron, isn't it? They're doing every single thing they can to make us look like we are a forward-looking, successful country and not the backwater that Brexit would supposedly have left us in.
We have some live pictures there on our screen. We can see a few revellers have shown up outside in Westminster here, and Alexander, we're expecting the first visit for Emmanuel Macron to Westminster Abbey there, just outside the Houses of Parliament, to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Of course, that does have a huge significant historical link between France and the United Kingdom.
Well, of course, we have to remember that whatever our historic differences between Britain and France, that obviously we did fight together in 2 world wars on the same side for once as well. So, and the unknown soldier is, of course, one of the great symbols of unity and liberté, égalité, fraternité between our 2 countries. So we can see certainly that you look at Macron and what he's doing here, and it's a mixture, isn't it? It's a mixture of things that he's doing because it's what you have to do in a state visit. And it's things he's doing because he genuinely does understand there is this link between Britain and France. And of course, we look at Macron's obvious admiration for Winston Churchill, and we can see he isn't Charles de Gaulle, but he's certainly somebody who would like to put himself in the great tradition of the French presidents like de Gaulle. And of course, we remember, don't we, that de Gaulle did not have the easiest relationship with Churchill, that de Gaulle was somebody who was, in fact, a rather controversial figure in World War II and beyond. So certainly, there's often been this tension between French presidents and British prime ministers. And indeed, what's interesting is that because the late Queen ruled for so long, she saw many, many leaders of France come and go. And do you know what? I'm not quite sure she was impressed by that many of them, you know.
It's interesting you mentioned about Charles de Gaulle, because, of course, he took residence in London during World War II when he was forced out of France by the Nazis and became, how should we put it, not the most welcome of guests in the end. In fact, in the end, I think Winston Churchill couldn't wait to see the back of him. And the Entente Cordiale severely tested during that. And I think looking forward later in the show, Alexander, when we see Macron laying a wreath at the statue of Charles de Gaulle, but also at the statue of Sir Winston Churchill, that would be a huge moment. The legacy of war together, and actually, were the French ever that grateful?
I'm not sure they were, you know, Martin, because I think there's always been a sense of a French character, of exceptionalism. There's always been a sense that they are better than everybody else, or whatever they choose to do. And, of course, we laugh about it most of the time, because the more self-aware French know they believe that they're exceptionalists. But the fact is that the less self-aware French, and of course, unfortunately, many of their leaders do fall into this category, they can't have the sense of being able to laugh at themselves, because one of the characteristics of the English has obviously been self-deprecation, whereas I don't think the French really understand self-deprecation, because to them it's, why would you laugh at yourself? You're wonderful. You're French.
OK, well, as we await the arrival of President Macron there at Westminster Abbey, we'll come back to that live as it happens. But for now, if you're in search of some holiday sun this year, then here is the forecast for some of the top European destinations.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Things have turned a little cooler across Italy, and a brisk northerly breeze will keep that going in Rome. Some heavy rain recently in Croatia, that's clearing away. Small chance of a shower in Madeira, but the Canaries fine, dry and sunny, as is Portugal and most of southern Spain. There is the chance of 1 or 2 showers near Barcelona. It's fine and sunny across Greece and Turkey. Plenty of sunshine on offer here, turning dry now in Croatia, as I said. A chance of 1 or 2 showers later this week, though, in Rome. Goodbye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
What stresses you out the most?
Oh, stupid people. Yeah, stupid people. Actually, I'm convinced the world is full of stupid people.
Right, OK.
All right, so stupid people...
Why are you looking at me? Why are you looking at me?
I actually wouldn't look at you, mate. You're a smart person. But no, honestly, if you were in my life, particularly when you rely on people to do things for you and they just can't see the obvious thing to do sometimes.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
But you have to be very grateful that they are doing things for you.
Yeah, that's...
Ellie, for me, it depends on the mood I'm in. Because if little things happen and I'm not in the right mood, then everything drives me crazy.
Now, that is a very good point. So, micro-stresses.
Is that what it is?
But according to the Daily Mail this morning, 89% of Britons are finding the small stresses is exhausting them the most.
Welcome back. Let's go straight now to live pictures, I believe, of Emmanuel Macron going into Westminster Abbey during his state visit. There we are. So he'll have taken out of one of the royal cars there, and the gates opened, and of course going inside to pay respects at the tomb of the unknown soldier. I'm joined by the constitutional expert, the historian Alexander Larman. Alexander Larman, of course, the tomb of the unknown soldier, of huge significance. Just explain to our viewers what it represents. And there's President Macron now with Brigitte Macron, his wife. Talk us about what's going to happen next.
Well, the reason why he's doing this thing at the tomb of the unknown soldier, Martin, is that obviously the unknown soldier represents all the young men who went away to war and never came back. And obviously, in many cases, their bodies were so blitzed beyond any recognition that it's quite hard to actually know what they looked like. So it was always felt that some symbolic representation of these very brave but very doomed young men who died, fighting for their country. And of course, the fact that all the Allied nations have this reverence for the symbol of the unknown soldier is very much something that Macron would have known is one of the key things he would have been doing during this visit.
And President Macron, Brigitte Macron there, just going inside the historic doors there of Westminster Abbey to lay that wreath down. And it's worth mentioning, Alexander Larman, so recently we were having our D-Day special back in June, the 81st anniversary, and it has to be said that despite all of the decades that have rolled past, one thing that certainly unites the French, the British, are the fallen in both World Wars, and those graveyards around Normandy, around Bayeux are tremendously moving. What I'm always struck by was we have now live pictures there inside the Abbey. Just to repeat, this is President Macron, Brigitte Macron, his wife, about to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. And Alexander just saying that I'm always struck by the absolute reverence that the French public certainly have for returning British servicemen there.
Yes, it's been interesting because obviously what happened in 1944 was that people went over and they liberated France. I mean, the British and the Americans came over on D-Day and they took the country out of Nazi occupation. So I think there is always going to be that gratitude because obviously if it hadn't been for D-Day, you have no idea how much longer the war could have gone on for. And that very brief, very dramatic invasion, that changed everything. And so, yes, I think there is this sense in the French national character that there is exceptionalism, but there's also a sense that if it hadn't been for the British and the Americans, there would have been this dreadful extended servitude under Nazi rule.
But then when we go back to that character we mentioned before the break, Charles de Gaulle, who, of course, lived in London during the Nazi occupation of his homeland, France. Never really seemed, Alexander Lom, to show that debt of gratitude towards the liberation of France. And in fact, when he went back to France after the end of World War II, common knowledge that Winston Churchill couldn't wait to see the back of him.
Well, Martin, I mean, I wouldn't pretend to be an expert on Charles de Gaulle, but what I would say is that what you have there is when you look at the people who were responsible for World War II's successful conclusion. I mean, we look at Roosevelt, we look at Churchill, we look at Stalin, I mean, somewhat bizarrely, but we don't really look at de Gaulle, because obviously France was invaded, France was conquered, that was the end of that. And so de Gaulle was, if anything, his figure on the sidelines for much of the Second World War. I mean, he wasn't...
It might be worth now, Alexander, just listening in for a moment for this speech.
Westminster Abbey is known as the House of God and the House of Kings, where God is worshipped every day, and where many great men and women are buried or memorialised. Here has taken place every coronation of kings and queens of England and of the United Kingdom, since William I was crowned here on Christmas Day, 1066. Here His Majesty the King was crowned on the 6th of May in 2023. Here every day thousands of people from all over the world are welcomed as visitors and pilgrims. We honour the unknown one. His body was brought here in 1920 from a battlefield cemetery in northern France and given a state funeral. His presence recalls to mind the world wars and conflicts of the past century, in which the forces of the Crown have been engaged together with those of our nation's allies. Here we pray for all those who have given their lives in the cause of peace. Here we pray for those who strive on our behalf for justice, freedom, and reconciliation. Your Excellency, I invite you to lay your wreath in honour of the unknown one and of all those represented at this grave. Let us pray. Let us remember all who have given their lives on our behalf in the wars of the last century, and let us pray for the peace for which they strove. O God, who wouldst fold both heaven and earth in a single peace, let the design of thy great love lighten upon the waste of our wraths and sorrows, and give peace among nations, peace in our dwellings, and peace in our hearts, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us pray for the peoples of the Republic of France and of the United Kingdom. Eternal God, fount and source of all authority and wisdom, hear our prayers for Charles our King and for the President of the Republic of France. Grant them grace as symbols of loyalty and unity for all their people. Inspire their governments with vision, understanding, and integrity. Give to the nation's legislatures and judiciaries wisdom and skill, imagination and energy, that all may live in peace and harmony, truth and prosperity. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. and let us pray for God's blessing. God grant to the living grace, to the departed rest, to the Church, the King, the Commonwealth, and all people, peace and concord, and to us sinners, life everlasting. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, be amongst you and remain with you always. Amen.
That was the French president there, Emmanuel Macron, and his wife, Brigitte Macron, handed a beautiful wreath in the colours of the French flag by two French servicemen. He then solemnly bowed down and touched it. I think he looked genuinely moved by that moment. And Alexander Lorman, for anybody who's been into that cavernous at Westminster Abbey, where the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is, it's a very overwhelming place. The acoustics, the aesthetics, the architecture. It's a wonderful, wonderful place, and it kind of magnifies, does it not, the importance, the gravitas of our historic bond of war, particularly at that's such a very moving tomb of the unknown soldier there. And the words inscribed on the bottom, I think, always move. It says, they buried him amongst the kings because he had done good towards God and towards his house.
Yes, it's very interesting to watch Macron there, because even if you don't like him and you can accuse him of a degree of insincerity, certainly in his political life, you can see there that obviously he is deeply moved by it, and he's dwarfed, I mean, both personally and politically by the environment he's in. And I think that it's telling he's very much aware of the sacred significance of what he's doing, as well as the constitutional significance. And yes, I mean, it's fascinating because this is... Even if you are, as he is, he's been president of France for the best part of a decade now, you think you've seen it all, but there's still moments that bring back to you your cosmic insignificance in the grand scale of things. And standing in Westminster Abbey, which is one of the world's great places of worship, you cannot help, especially with the significance of the unknown soldier, you can't but help be reminded of how little you matter and how little anything that you are doing is going to add up to in the long term.
And I think Alexander Lorman, we've been talking about how this is the most political, perhaps, of royal visits you'll maybe ever see. But I think at times where you remember the fallen, you remember the bond of war, the band of brothers, it kind of puts all that to one side and makes it insignificant. And Alexander Lorman, moving ahead now, for those just tuning in, what are we going to see moving forward towards the rest of the day after this meeting of dignitaries here? We're going to see President Macron moving towards the House of Commons.
Yes, we're going to see him give a speech, and he's going to address both houses of Parliament. And then, more interesting from a constitutional perspective, he's going to go to Windsor Castle this evening, and he and the King are both going to deliver speeches. And they're both going to say various things about the Entente Cordiale. And what's been quite interesting is that Charles's speech has been heavily trailed in advance, and he's going to say all these things about how the relationship between Britain and France is one without borders, and that language is a very specific use of language, which I think has been met with confusion and concern in many quarters.
If you're just tuning in, it's 4 p.m. and welcome to this very special edition of the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. Of course, President Macron, President of France, and his wife there, Brigitte Macron, enjoying a full state visit, the full royal bells and whistles with all of the trimmings. Earlier on, touchdown at Windsor Castle, meted by Prince William, Princess Kate, and of course the King and Queen Consort. And now they have come to London in that royal helicopter, and after a brief walk to the Westminster Abbey there, they just short while ago laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier, and we're just remarking upon the fact how it kind of dwarfs the politics, it dwarfs the individuals and brings things into an historical perspective. There's live pictures there now, just from inside Westminster. I'm joined in the studio by our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, you've been out and about around Parliament Square there. You've seen the build-up, and now we're moving towards a greatly anticipated speech by Emmanuel Macron due to address both houses, we understand, and a lot of the information from the King's speech later on has been briefed or leaked out. Do we know anything about the content of what we're to expect from President Macron in the chamber?
Hi, Martin. Great to see you here. No, we don't know yet, but I think what he will do is speak in English.
Right.
That's the first thing for viewers to know, because, of course, when he's overseas with at the G7, when I've seen him, for example, he speaks French to the French press, but he's good at English. We saw that when our late Queen Elizabeth, the much missed Queen, died. He spoke vividly in English in a tribute to her, and everyone was quite surprised to hear him speak English so well, because you don't often hear that. So we will hear him speak English. I'm looking at the walls there on the sides of the Royal Gallery there. In the House of Lords end of Parliament, it looks like they haven't covered up those scenes of Waterloo and Trafalgar, those defeats of the French in battle. Previously, when Charles de Gaulle came here, as I said earlier to you, in 1960, they were covered up to save the embarrassment, frankly. But yeah, it's fascinating here. The King had to cancel his state visit to France due to riots in France that time, and the banquet at the Palace of Versailles, where they were going to serve Paul Roger champagne, Sir Winston Churchill's favourite. So we are about to see the full pomp and circumstance, the welcome here of Parliament to the French president. They're in the Royal Gallery. I've been there before for the German president spoke there previously, so it seems to be the place that is used for continental leaders. It's not, of course, the meeting of both houses of Parliament in Westminster Hall, the historic Westminster Hall, where of course, last year we saw the Ukrainian President Zelensky address MPs and peers. So that can be used, but this is the smaller place that happens. It's just beyond the House of Lords chamber.
And Westminster, we still see their live on the left of our screen. That is President Macron and Brigitte Macron still inside Westminster Abbey, saying hello to the dignitaries there, to the clerics there. Only a short walk over the road there, Chris, back to the chamber. I don't suppose they'll be going through security like you or I have to.
No.
But there'll still be a good few moments away, a good few minutes away.
Yes.
In the build-up to that, shall we discuss some of the political backdrop to what we've been talking about? Because, as we said in the last hour, Chris Hope, it's been a very, very apolitical state visit, dripping with politics from Sir Keir Starmer, who, of course, wants to try and get that one in, one out immigration deal rubber stamped with France, despite the fact 5 or 6 European Union member states and the European Commission themselves don't like it. Dripping with politics because Emmanuel Macron is saying he welcomes Sir Keir Starmer's efforts to reset relationships with the European Union and, of course, the King himself. Somewhat, should we say, putting his foot in it, perhaps, by saying there will be no borders between Britain and France, despite the fact that our Prime Minister himself wants to try and strengthen borders between Britain and France.
I mean, putting his foot in it might be a bit strongly. It depends how you view the language. I mean, some would say, the King here looks like he's trying to stay above politics and recognise that there are two equal-sized countries. They're our nearest neighbour in the continent of Europe. There's more that unites us than divides us, and perhaps those remarks from President Macron when the late Queen died is part of that. But certainly the politics starts, for me, properly on Thursday. That's when we have the summit, the plenary, the big moment between the two governments. There'll be a meeting tomorrow, we expect, in Downing Street, but Thursday is the big day. What they want is a one-in, one-out deal. We debated this endlessly at GB News. It doesn't look like it'll bring numbers down. It merely swaps illegal arrivals for them who can be here from France. We'll wait and see how that plays out. The briefing just happened with the number 10 press team with my colleague Adam Cherry from GB News. No change there. So it might go down to the wire, and it would be a snub, I think, if the UK can't get this agreed. It's been floated for quite a while now. This one-in, one-out deal is to allow, trying to put people off from making that dangerous journey across the English Channel by saying, if you go there and you're illegal, you legally arrived and you have no right to be there, you will be returned to France. But the wider deal, this could be blocked by many of the 5 members of the European Union, That's why it's so concerning. But you're seeing now images on screen there of peers and MPs, and that noise you hear is the hubbub as they wait to welcome the French president. I've been upstairs, by the way, walking around outside the House of Lords just now. There are loads of barriers up, but not a lot of crowds. I'm not sure whether people know he's coming. I heard people asking the police why all these barriers up. It's obviously protect his security as he arrives.
Yeah, I mean, I was the same, Chris. I came in about 1 o'clock. I came in today by train. I expected the roads to be packed. It was no busier than a normal day. I have to be absolutely frank. Doesn't seem to be the public fervour around this. But let's get back, Chris Hope, to the politics of this deal, this one-in, one-out deal. I spoke to a fascinating Italian journalist last night when I was doing GB News Tonight, and she spelled out in very plain terms, in language I hadn't heard before, why they don't want this to happen. And quite simply, it's because Italy, Spain, Greece, Malta and Cyprus are dead against the proposed deal because they are the countries, the main points of entry from Africa, from outside the Middle East, for example. And if France were to do a deal with the United Kingdom, it could mean that illegal immigrants could be deported back to where? Perhaps back to the first country they entered, which could mean they will not return to France at all. They return to Italy, Spain, Greece, Malta and Cyprus. They've all complained like Billio to the European Commission. That's why they don't want this deal to get off the ground.
So it's not an anti-British thing at all. Right. It's one about protecting themselves against the influx of migrants, because they're happy to usher them on. In a sense, I mean, France is maybe happy to see the back of migrants because they're causing a drain on resources, raising tensions possibly also in parts of France into the UK. But I mean, the problem is dealing with it at the border. I think the UK gets that and is trying to help police, or to a degree help police the southern border of the EU as well.
But I think when it's spelled out in those terms of perfect clarity, it's like, why would the Italians want potentially an illegal immigrant who's in Dover going back to France, only to find out, actually, they entered the continent of Europe in Italy? Hey, it's your problem, Giorgia Meloni. Well, it's your problem, Spain, Greece, Malta, Cyprus. So we can see that does Macron even have the political clout and the ability and the freedom to do this kind of a bespoke deal? I suspect the European Commission are going to torpedo it, Chris.
I can see why, because, of course, any single member of the European Union can torpedo those deals. That's the nature of how it works over there. You were there as an MEP for all those years, Martin. You saw how frustrating it was when the European Union, which isn't elected, is stopping you do what you want to do. So it goes both ways, I think, by idea of a mandate.
Well, it's all for one and one for all, and that's the precise point. The notion of reforming from within the European Union was for the birds. That's why you have to get out of it. But the fact of the matter remains, this flagship deal seems to be what Sir Keir Starmer is pinning some clean to it like driftwood, to pardon the sort of maritime metaphor. But it seems it could be smashed to driftwood. The European Commission won't let it dock.
No, indeed, and that is the frustration, I think, for Sir Keir Starmer. He's pursuing this agenda of doing deals and getting close to power brokers within the European Union. Next week, we're seeing the German Chancellor come here, not on the same scale. He's not head of state. He will come here for talks with Sir Keir Starmer. But, yeah, this is an attempt at kind of Sir Keir Starmer reaching out, I think, to do deals and get a better understanding. There wasn't so long. We had some hostile words expressed by Liz Truss before she became Prime Minister about France. So there was a lot of rebuilding work to be done, and that started under Rishi Sunak, the Tory Prime Minister.
Okay, let's bring in my other studio guest, Alexander Lorman. Sorry, Chris Hope and I there went back into politics land. We can't help ourselves. But as I said to you, Alexander, I just feel this state visit is dripping with politics. It's all over the place. But when presidents tend to make these kind of speeches, it won't be overtly political, will it? It's probably going to be relatively neutral.
Well, Martin, I suppose that what's interesting about Macron is that he's not necessarily addressing a partisan audience here, because his relationship with the Conservative Party over the last few years, as you've said, has been an up and down one, especially given Liz Truss's rather ill-considered remarks about whether she wasn't sure if he was friend or foe. But certainly he is amongst friends today. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think it's also fair to say that this is not the most important part of the day. The most important part of the day is what's going to happen this evening when he goes to Windsor Castle and he has the state banquet, which both he and the King are going to make these speeches at, because that's been the most trailed aspect of his visit so far. That's the thing that most people are going to be keeping an eye on. And we've had all these trailed remarks about how he doesn't want there to be any borders between France and Britain. The King, that is, not Macron. And it's very interesting language coming from a sovereign, because obviously the King is supposed to be apolitical. He's supposed to be somebody who is not involved in party politics. And yet he seems to be a sovereign who is obsessed by being involved in party politics. So we have to ask ourselves, what is going on here? And this is going to be an interesting trailer for it, because we're going to see in this speech, which I assume Macron is going to give in English, because most parliamentarians don't actually speak fluent French, we're going to see essentially the groundwork being laid for what's going to be coming in a few hours from Windsor Castle.
And Alexander Lomond, as you've pointed out, of course, King Charles fluent in French, so no doubt to at least give a tranche of his speech this evening in French, and cementing that relationship. But I want to get back to
un petit peu.
There we go. What will Emmanuel Macron want to get out of this visit? And more to the point, is this full treatment? Is it a way of softening up a president, making them feel special, making them feel regal, to try and make them bend a bit further to our wind?
What's quite interesting about Macron is that he knows he's a busted flush at home and the next 2 years are going to be nondescript in France, but he's got much more of a standing overseas. He's seen as part of this self-created United States of Europe, which of course he would like Britain to be part of. Hence all this talk about the absence of borders, and indeed hence something like this, indeed hence his addressing Parliament, because he wants to bring about this entente cordiale and he wants to do it on his own terms. So he would like us to once again become a kind of European vassal, and he would like to be the person who gets the credit for bringing Britain back into, if not for EU, a special Emmanuel Macron created version of European Union. And he's a very charming man, so he might get further than some of his predecessors have.
Well, let's bring in my next studio guest. I'm joined by the political commentator Dominic Moffat. Dominic, welcome to the studio on this historic day. I wanted to ask you about what Sir Keir Starmer hopes to get out of this. Clearly, they have a Brexit bromance, well, more to the point, a contempt of Brexit, at least in the past. And we keep hearing about both parties mentioning a reset of the relationship between France and Britain, but also with the European Union. I was saying before we arrived, I think this entire state visit is dripping in politics. What's Sir Keir Starmer hoping to achieve?
Good afternoon, Martin, and absolutely, this state visit is dripping in politics. I think you're right. What is obvious is that Keir Starmer is facing a lot of pressure at home, and some of the biggest successes of his period as Prime Minister have been on the international stage. He's done very well with President Trump, and he has previously shown a good relationship with President Macron as well. If you look at the PLMR and electoral calculus polling, the most important issue for Reform Party voters is immigration and controls at the border. And getting a deal with Macron on that will go a long way to returning some of those voters to the Labour Party, or at least I think that's what Keir Starmer is hoping.
The problem with that, Dominic Moffat, we were just discussing before you arrived, is that there are 5 or 6 European Union member states that are dead against a bespoke deal between France and the United Kingdom, because it could well mean people being deported to their nation. Italy, Spain, Greece, Malta and Cyprus dead against a bespoke deal because they're fearful of the fact that the illegal immigrants coming into Britain from France may well have entered Italy, Spain, Greece, Malta and Cyprus, might be sent back there. So this sense of Macron and Starmer trying to form a bespoke deal and outmanoeuvre Brussels, if you like, well, it might be torpedoed by Brussels.
Absolutely, and that is one of the weaknesses for the UK that comes from leaving the European Union, no longer having a seat around that table in the same way.
There was no chance of a bespoke immigration deal with Brussels when we were in the European Union.
But the point for the Prime Minister, for Keir Starmer, is that by looking tough on this, by talking about it on the public stage, he gets to show his support for finding a deal. You're absolutely right that getting a deal is a very different issue, and that's not so likely, but attempting to get a deal is an important part of the process.
Do you think that people like Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, I mean, both are besieged by terrible popularity on home soil? I think I said earlier on, only 3% of the French electorate are very satisfied with their president. It's like 21%, a fifth, are even satisfied with him in any way at all. So it's a welcome opportunity to be able to play away, as it were, on the world stage. Sir Keir Starmer seems more comfortable when was it his 27th foreign trip? Chris Hope is done. They joke that he's never here, Keir. But now this is where the rubber hits the road in Britain, and all this pomp and ceremony is down ostensibly to Sir Keir Starmer getting a result on British soil. Will this pomp and ceremony help that?
Well, it might, or certainly oil it. I think no one does pomp and circumstance better than the UK. We're seeing it today, of course, already in Windsor Castle. But yeah, he does like travelling. He did say, didn't he, to that podcast in 2023, January, where would you rather be, Parliament or Davos? He said Davos. I mean, he does like being on the world stage. He does do well on the world stage, Martin. We've been with him most recently in the Rocky Mountains when he was at the G7. He does move the agenda around to his one, which this year was all about illegal migration. He's someone who is a sensible person on the world stage, I think, but I think he lacks a kind of political touch, as we saw last week with that disastrous vote on benefits, hollowing out of a benefits bill, creating a £5 billion black hole that wasn't there before. So I think, that he's got his weaknesses, but this is the best you'll see of Sir Keir Starmer. Some saying he lacks ego, and that helps because he steps back from the relationship between the King and the French president. Don't forget, in terms of how it works on the international stage, because he's an elected Prime Minister, then the President of France is one rank above him. So when you're overseas, if they have a meeting, say at a G20 or G7, our Prime Minister must go to where the French President is, because he outranks him in terms of the world of being a head of state, not being a Prime Minister. So in this sense, Mr Macron will be looking at the King as his equal, I think, probably not so much Sir Keir Starmer.
The room falls silent on that point. Are you seriously saying that we all figured that Emmanuel Macron is a man not without a giant ego, despite his somewhat less than giant stature? Are you saying he sees the King as his equal and not our Prime Minister? That's astonishing.
But that's literally true, because he's a head of state and our Prime Minister isn't one. So the head of state is the King. He's the equal of the French President. Sir Keir Starmer is one rung below that. Yes, he's elected, but the head of state is the King. I was looking back at what was said in the past. There's remarks about the late Queen, and I think he did get it right when he said to us, she was your queen. Sorry, to us she was the Queen, but to you she was your Queen. He understood that connection, I think, the Brits had with the Queen. And of course, the French in the past did have a monarchy.
And we're still waiting to see, in case you're joining us, live pictures, we're waiting for the French President Emmanuel Macron to make the short walk over from Westminster Abbey, just been a short while ago, laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Westminster Abbey. Short walk over the way, and we're waiting for President Macron to address chamber. Chris, just give us a flavour of who's in this room. I mean, this is not like addressing the Commons, as Zelensky did. What kind of dignitaries are here today?
Well, we're expected to see, and we haven't got a list here from the Palace of Westminster, but you'll see the Lord Speaker, John McFall, Lord McFall. You'll see Lindsay Hoyle, who's the House of Commons Speaker. You'll see, of course, the President, of course, and his wife, Brigitte Macron. But you'll also see Sir Keir Starmer, possibly Lady Starmer, his wife, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, Sir Ed Davey. Both of those two opposition leaders will be having audiences with the French President after this event.
And no Nigel Farage.
Well, yes, I mean, there's no reason to give him one. He's the sixth biggest party in Parliament with just 4 MPs after James Murdoch left Reform UK at lunchtime after resigning the whip at the weekend. So he's a tiny party. We raise the issue of Nigel Farage because he's so far ahead in the polls. And if you want to use this event to try and connect closer between Paris and London, it may well be that you have Nigel Farage with 200, 300 MPs after the election. So maybe practically there should be a connection, but there hasn't been. But otherwise, you'll see a kind of random selection, really, of peers and MPs invited. It's hard to tell from their backs of the heads who they all are, and there are some journalists at the back too. But it's about 200 people or so there, as I say, with murals of Waterloo and Trafalgar looking down on them. Those images on the wall were covered when Charles de Gaulle came here to spare his blushes. That hasn't been done here for Emmanuel Macron.
Dominic, your thoughts on the fact that Nigel Farage isn't in the audience? Is that the correct thing to do?
I think it's probably not the correct thing to do. I don't think it shows Nigel Farage sees himself as a Prime Minister in waiting, even if the polling shows him winning an absolutely massive majority in the event of an election. I remember a few years ago, I was there in the Royal Gallery for the visit of King Willem-Alexander of the Netherlands, again, another head of state rather than a head of government and not an elected head of state. You know, the audience is made up from the front of... they're all in hierarchy order, so government ministers are at the very front, moving backwards through more senior backbenchers, shadow front bench, and then through to backbenchers and members of the House of Lords, who actually probably go in front of backbench from the House of Commons as it's in the Lords' end of the building. It's a very eclectic audience. You will typically find people in that room who have a specific connection to France, people who will have a more of a personal interest. It's not a whipped organisation. There is no demand to be there for anybody. In fact, they're normally heavily oversubscribed, and it looks as though the room is full of MPs and members of the House of Lords, rather than them topping the room up with staff. That's how I got in. King Willem-Alexander maybe not as popular for a speech as the President of France.
And we're seeing now evidence of who's there. So we're seeing Lucy Powell, who's leader of the House of Commons. She's there. The PM, Sir Keir Starmer, is yet to arrive. This is a place where previous US presidents have addressed peers and MPs. Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, German Chancellor Angela Merkel have all addressed both houses in here. Of course, fast forward to September, will this room be big enough for Donald Trump? I suspect he'll want to address both houses in Westminster Hall, but I digress. That is for the future. We're also seeing reports now of the cross-party changes being agreed. Now, the bi-year tapestry, yes, it looks like will be loaned, according to reports, and go on display at the British Museum next year, on show from September 2026 to July 2027. In exchange, we're passing our most valuable treasures from the Sutton Hoo Anglo-Saxon burial site in Suffolk. That'll be going to France, along with the Lewis chessmen. So big moments here, big exchange of valuable but priceless cultural artefacts.
And Alexander Lorman, just bring you back in now. We can have live pictures there, so we can see Emmanuel Macron still inside Westminster Abbey, signing some sort of ceremonial visitor's book, and I guess he'll do this before he makes his way over to deliver that speech.
I should say we are now quite late on the schedule.
Yes, we are.
So we were expecting the addressing of both houses to start at about 4:10. Later on, we'll be seeing the Macrons paying their respects to a statue of Winston Churchill, and then after that to the statue of Charles de Gaulle, both in London. And of course, then we'll see the Macrons heading to Windsor Castle for the state banquet starting around 8 p.m. tonight. There's probably a bit of time to make up between the start of the state banquet and the various other events in London. So there is time, and clearly it looks there, smiling Emmanuel Macron, for those who can't see and listening on the radio, and Bridget Macron. They're looking through, it looks like a visitor's book of some sort, arriving at Westminster Abbey.
Yeah, these moments can't be hurried on, Alexander Lorman. Yeah, with the address to Parliament was due to begin some 25 minutes ago, so we're slightly behind schedule, but he very much seems to be enjoying it.
Yes, I mean, if you look at Macron, he's gone from the earlier very sombre demeanour that he was showing when he was seeing the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Now he's smiling and he looks as if he's genuinely enjoying himself. He looks like he's genuinely having a good time, which is nice, because obviously he's a man beset by the woes of office. So you look at, I mean, a day like today, it's actually, he's being spoilt, isn't he? He's been taken around, he's had a nice lunch, he's been shown these Marie Antoinette artefacts and other things by the king. He's going to go to a banquet tonight. This sort of thing's actually, when you are a president, this is the more enjoyable part of the job, because You're not around people who despise you. You're around people who actually want to see you. You've a gravity of office is being attached to you. And so all of these people are not people who are running into him every day. They're not his cabinet. They're not people who are saying to him, you're really unpopular at home. These people who are actually thinking, I've never met the President of France before. So it's much easier to become statesman-like in these situations.
And Chris, Emmanuel Macron, despite whatever you think of his politics, he's always been a supremely confident and swaggering president of France. And this is him in his comfort zone now.
100%. He's now emerging from the door, the Great West Door there of Westminster Abbey. I imagine will he walk around the corner to the House of Lords, or will he get into a vehicle? We'll see very shortly. This is a space, I think, where world leaders Emmanuel Macron and even Sir Keir Starmer, I would argue, are comfortable. The difficult stuff is doing the politics back home. He's got his own problems in France, as we saw with the Gilets Jaunes riots in recent years, and also Sir Keir Starmer with battling with his own party. Going back to those gifts, we should be seeing later on today Emmanuel Macron at the British Museum to inspect, and presumably where the Bayeux tapestry will be sited. I think the scale of this loan, there's no bigger, well, there aren't many bigger things in France than the Bayeux tapestry. Obviously about William the Conqueror's conquest of England back in 1066.
Allegedly made by English weavers.
Well, indeed. I mean, the scale of that, but what that demonstrates to me is the absolute trust between the UK and France. To lend that priceless treasure to the UK's British Museum, and for us to lend back things plucked from the Sutton Hoo site.
Alexander Larman, you and I were speaking earlier about this. I wonder if the Bayeux tapestry being loaned might set a template that could inevitably lead us towards the Elgin marbles rolling out of Britain.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story of The Critic a few weeks ago, which suggested that essentially Osborne was now open to a return of the Elgin marbles. And of course, it wouldn't be said that we're sending it back as a gift. It would be a long-term loan. But obviously, not so much beware of Greeks bearing gifts as beware of Greeks being given gifts, I'd say, in this case.
There's been a change of language on that, I've noticed, in parliamentary documents. They're now called the Parthenon marbles, not the Elgin marbles, which indicates a more neutrality in how we view them. We're looking on camera now, Martin, at the French president leaving Westminster Abbey.
So, Emmanuel Macron getting into one of those glorious state cars. I mean, it's a very, very short trip, but I guess for security purposes, Chris Oak, you're absolutely right. The short journey. Just over the way, you can see actually over there the parliamentary building. Very short trip. I think you're right, Chris. There's no coincidence. The Pantheon marbles, the language, the first casualty, the Malvinas, the Falklands. I mean,
these things matter, Martin.
Yeah, they do matter. And I do think you have a great point, Alexander. We could be seeing this softening of Britain being encouraged to follow suit.
Well, the question is, what do we want in exchange? Because Greece has got obviously lots of endlessly wonderful artefacts, but we plundered the ones we wanted a couple of centuries ago, so it's not like there's anything else we could want as a reciprocal thing. Because, of course, with the beginning of a deal with France, I mean, we'd like to have a Mona Lisa, for instance. We'd like to have some of those. I can't see that coming here anytime soon, though.
Yeah, imagine putting that one over today, Dominic Moffat. Yeah, it's a great idea. President Macron about the Bayeux tapestry. What about the Mona Lisa?
Well, I think there are some fine examples from the English crown jewels in the Louvre as well, which were sold during the English Civil War and after it. Lots of it was lost at the time and disappeared.
Looted, I believe.
But where do you stop? We'll be left with nothing left in the British Museum if we take too much out of it.
That's right, and I think that's the precise destination of the Bayeux tapestry. I believe we'll be going to the British Museum. They're announcing that officially, I believe, tomorrow. And again, that's the home, right, of the Elgin marbles.
I think we should say it's a massive coup for George Osborne, because obviously that would have come from him rather than from anyone else in politics, which shows again that Osborne, the most political of chairmen of the British Museum.
Yes. We have got some personalised gift now being brought to President Macron for the King. A rare opera score by Claude Debussy's opera Pelléas et Mélisande, featuring a handwritten dedication from the publisher to one of the early lead performers, a ceremonial trumpet, a personalised watercolour box. Of course, our King is a very keen artist. It's inscribed, presented to His Majesty King Charles III by Mr. Emmanuel Macron, the President of the French Republic, and a gourmet hamper with a curated selection of artisanal sweet and savoury delicacies, all made in France and bearing the Élysée seal. Not held up, it seems, by Brexit checks at the border, Martin.
No, well, that's good to hear. It's good to hear that Brexit didn't get in the way of the President's gifts to the King. Dominic Moffat, you've been in that room, you've experienced it. Tell us about what we can expect now, coming next.
So it will be very hot in there. There will be a lot of people handing out bottles of water. You've seen it already on the Shine, on the camera. You don't want members of the House of Lords passing out. It will get very excitable. Every now and again, silence will fall in the room as they think something's about to happen before it will all pick back up. I suspect you will see doorkeepers rushing into position, House of Lords doorkeepers, most of whom are former military men, but now led, I think, by the former chief executive of Wimbledon, who is having another busy week, even though she's left. And you will see those doorkeepers take position, and they will then indicate that everything is about to begin.
And I wonder if he'll be getting in through that £7 million door to the House of Lords.
I think it's 9.6 million now, I'm afraid, Martin Daubney. It was 6.1, it's 3.5 million over budget, and inquiry's been launched. That was, of course, for security. The King will also be inspecting the new railings around the House of Lords, which, of course, there's some concern, obviously erected for security reasons, but it looks pretty ugly for peers going in and out.
Yeah, no borders between England and France, but plenty of borders around the House of Lords, paid for by the British taxpayer. Plenty of borders around Buckingham Palace too. Yes. I digress.
I've had a text here from saying someone, an MP, I won't name them, waiting for President Macron. He's now over half an hour late, he says, with an alarm clock. So the backs of the heads you're seeing there for GB News viewers and for listeners, we're looking at the back end of their heads as we look through the Royal Gallery to where President Macron will appear. Maybe some frustration amongst some people about being kept waiting, but of course he is the elected head of state of France. If he's late, and he must do his work.
Well, Dominic Moffat, people wait 45 minutes, they wait an hour. We once waited 2 hours to hear Donald Trump speak, but by Jove, it's often worth it. Will it be worth the wait, Dominic Moffat?
I think we can expect a very positive speech from President Macron. It will be full of bonhomie, to put it in their local language. Parlance. What I think we'll see is President Macron will arrive at the base of the Victoria Tower. President Macron will alight from that vehicle that we've seen and climb the steps up through the Norman porch, surrounded by statues of the Norman kings of England, decorated on the outside, and up past some of the earliest British prime ministers, busts in that lobby, just out of sight through those doors at the far end on the right, which is where the monarch arrives as well for the traditional state opening of Parliament, though for the state opening of Parliament it is flanked by soldiers from the Household Division, dismounted, I hasten to add, rather than on horseback, as they're on a set of stairs. And he will then be able to come straight through those doors on the right and onto the stage there. I suspect the first sign that he is arriving will be the Lord Speaker, the people on the dais at the top standing up to welcome him, which will give us that view that he is about to hove into our sight. It's a very grand space. It's a couple of stories high in itself. For the state opening of Parliament, actually, someone lies on the floor, pokes their head through a hole to see the exact moment the monarch arrives on site so that the flag can be raised with their arrival exactly on time. Again, I don't know what the flag-raising situation is today. This looks, however, as though we can expect something shortly.
We have a column of
people coming in,
popping in now. No sign of President Macron himself yet. Dominic Moffat, just to be absolutely clear, the King won't be here now. We'll hear this parliamentary matter.
This looks as though the King is not there. I suspect the King would be there to welcome the President. I think the King has probably already done his part.
Also, the King would not be allowed to enter Parliament at this stage. It's important to remember that he can only enter Parliament with the consent of Parliament, hence the state opening, all the pageantry of his being invited in, so he couldn't just wander in because he fancied seeing what Macron was going to say.
I can report from my source in the room that there's no programmes, but they are handing out bottles of water because it is quite warm outside.
I wonder if it's English water or Evian. I digress. I wonder if they got delayed by Brexit, Chris.
I don't think so, but I think that we are about to see, the French President appear there. It looks like there's some activity. We have a fixed camera available for all broadcasters. You're seeing that. I think it looks to me like the shape of Lindsay Hoyle, the House of Commons Speaker, arriving. That means, I think, is he of course, with Black Rod, who's the King's representative, and also John McFall, Lord McFall, the Lord Speaker. Those are the individuals who will now have welcomed Emmanuel Macron to the House, to Parliament.
If anybody could have a word with the cameraman and maybe give him a short, sharp shock, perhaps he could zoom in just a bit more for us so we weren't quite craning our neck from the back of the room, so we can see a little bit closer. But the cameraman are standing up. I don't think yet President Macron will have arisen, because I'm assuming, Dominic Moffat, it will be customary at that moment for everybody in the audience to stand.
The entire room will rise to show respect to the President. Of course, the President has just come from something that is within the ownership of the King. Westminster Abbey is not a church within the bishop, within kind of under the control of a bishop. It's in fact a royal peculiar. And
so the crowd has arisen. So that's our visual cue, and that President Macron is in the room. Here we go. See live pictures of President Macron walking in, having a right royal round of applause. That's Lindsay Hall, the Speaker there. Chris Oberman, you know well.
Yes, there he is, welcoming, and he'll say a few words, I think, shortly, before we'll hear from Emmanuel Macron. Everyone rising, of course, in respect for a respected head of the state. And then alongside there we have Bridget Macron and Lord McFall, John McFall, who's the Lord.
He did wink at the audience in a rather cheeky way, but he is...
He's a showman, isn't he? I mean, you can see with Macron that he has those showman instincts. I mean, you don't see many people who wink at the audience before you begin.
You're right. So
he'll be winking because in the front row he'll have ministers and people who he knows already. He may have met them already. And here we have Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, about to address and welcome Emmanuel Macron.
President Macron, Mrs. Macron, Prime Minister, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Parliament. The historical ties between our countries are long and deep. Indeed, they are embedded in the language we use here in both houses. To start with, the word for our assembly, a parliament. Every day I work with a document called the dossier. And as legislation is passed between the houses, it is still endorsed in Norman French. Our shared history goes back now over 900 years. But the Entente Cordiale began relatively recently, 120 years ago. Since then, our states have had a broad and deep partnership, working together on European and global security. Together with peaceful ties, we have cooperated on defence in the past. We have fought side by side with France in the First World War. In every town and every village, our memorials remember those who went to war and did not return. From across the country, units like those in my own constituency of Chorley, the Chorley Pals, who fought on the Somme, went and did what had to be done. And again, in the Second World War, we were proud to form a base for the French government in exile. The beginning of the end of the war came on the beaches of Normandy. In 1944, Speaker Clifton Brown led a parliamentary delegation to visit Allied troops on the front line in Normandy. And France has never forgotten how we fought together. In 2018, I was honoured to be the ceremony in Chorley, where several of my constituents received France's highest honour, the National Order, the Legion of Honour, for their part in the liberation of France. In this year, the 80th anniversaries of victory in Europe and victory over Japan, we will remember them. Our defence and cooperation continues and is more vital than ever. 15 years ago, on the 2nd of November 2010, the Lancaster House Treaties were signed. Britain and France undertook to build a long-term partnership in defence and security. Fast forward to 2025, and last month I met President Zelensky again here in Parliament, a man who we are proud to call our friend. As Europe continues to be under threat once more, I salute your efforts, Mr. President, to work with our country to build a coalition of the willing, ready to play their part in ensuring Ukraine's future security. Defence remains a key consideration. But our ties are not just defence-related, of course. They're also parliamentary ties. In March 1939, the first ever foreign dignitary to address both houses was French President Albert Lebrun. He began a long-term and welcome tradition of engagement between French and UK politicians. Indeed, just a few weeks ago, I hosted my counterpart, Speaker Yelbrun Pivet, following a fruitful discussions at the G7 Speakers Conference. There has always been strong parliamentary cooperation. Over 100 years ago, our countries were founding the members of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, a body promoting peace, democracy for everyone through parliamentary diplomacy and dialogue. And then, of course, there are our sporting connections. Like you, Mr. President, I am a big sports fan. When people think of French sport, they often think of cycling, rugby union, fencing, or football. My own team, Bolton Wanderers, had a fantastic French player, Yuri Djorkov, when we were a good side. But I want to praise your your rugby football league, a passion of mine. In 1934, Jean Gallet took a French team that had never played rugby league and he went to Yorkshire. And thankfully, they made it to the right side of the Pennines when they came to Lancashire in England, my home county. As a result, French Rugby League was formed on the 6th of April 1934. The sport had many trials and tribulations to follow, including being banned and stripped of its assets under the Vichy government. But after the war, the French game was re-established, and French became one of Rugby League's major powers. France was the driving force behind the establishment of the Rugby League World Cup. However, the path to the game of 13 was not easy, so it was fantastic when a professional Rugby League side, Catalan Dragons, joined our Super League. Although it was great to see a French Rugby League blossoming, unfortunately, I fear we have taught you too much on the pitch. The Catalan Dragons demonstrated their prowess in 2018 when they won the Rugby League Challenge Cup, beating none other than my home team, Warrington Wolves, 20 points to 14, before a crowd of 50,000 at Wembley. As they say in France, c'est la vie. There are also feats of engineering which connect us. We all know that 30 years ago, the Channel Tunnel connected the two countries more closely than ever. But our countries also share energy links through the electric interconnectors and the great industrial partnerships such as Airbus. We are truly bound together. So, Mr. President, I welcome you wholeheartedly and hope the cooperation between our countries will continue to flourish. Mr. President, please.
Mr. Prime Minister, Madam, Honourable Ministers, Mr. Speaker, Lord Speaker, Honourable Members of Parliament, Members of the House of Lords, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you, Speaker, for your kind words and greatly appreciate everyone's warm welcome. On behalf of my wife Bridget and myself and my whole delegation, thank you very much for that. And it is a very great honour to speak before the two houses of the British Parliament, a place composed of both a high chamber and a low chamber, a place of history bygone and history in the making, a place where modern democracy emerged and the principles of democratic representation and consent were born. In making its own rules, your great people has inspired among the rest of the world, and in particular my compatriots, who regard you with respect, with more than a bit of admiration. In France, Montesquieu and Rousseau drew from the works of Locke to such an extent that the Lettres philosophiques by Rousseau are often referred to as letters on the English in my country. But please, do not misunderstand me. I'm not going so far as to say that England gave birth to the French Revolution. However, I have to confess that we love monarchy, but especially when it's not at home. But I really believe that from the Magna Carta to America's Declaration of Independence in 1776 and France's Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in 1789, a same pathway emerged towards democratic order and the rule of law. And so many times, this shared path was forged in the brotherhood of arms. So many times it followed the small trails of the Ardennes and the Vosges mountains under the hail of German bullets from 1914 to 1918. So many times it almost veered off course, taken up by our common ancestors, reconquering the Normandy coast inch by inch under the glaring sun of June 1944. And I would like to thank Prime Minister Starmer, dear Keir, for attending the ceremonies of the 11th of November last year, honoring our fallen soldiers, the British Red Poppy alongside the Bleuet de France, becoming the first British head of government to spend Armistice Day in Paris in 80 years. Thank you. The French people shall never forget the sacrifices British people made to protect Europe and the world during the two world wars, and to uphold with fierce determination the promise of our Entente Cordiale. We shall never forget the support of the asylum your forefathers gave to the Free French forces in the fight against the barbarism of the Nazis. Sir Winston Churchill was one of the visionaries who had the foresight to help forge a strong transatlantic alliance and to come up with a peaceful European order in which he deeply believed. He passed this same vision on to us of a world order based on law, justice, and respect for territorial integrity. An order that is today being attacked on a daily basis as we witness direct attacks on our democracies, the return of war to our continent, the resurgence of imperial impulses, and the flouting of international rules by destabilizing powers who are attempting to divide up the world to their advantage. Speaker, you and your predecessors have become famous, I have to say, even in France, for your way of restoring order in the court with your imperial and imperious exclamations, order, order. And today, we wish to join you in shooting out order, order with you to calm the unrest in the world. As permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, deeply committed to multilateralism, the United Kingdom and France must once again show the world that our alliance can make all the difference. Clearly, we have to work together in order to defend an efficient multilateralism and to protect the international order as we forged it after the Second World War. And first, in supporting Ukraine, which has been illegally attacked, by both rallying the support of Europeans and coordinating with the Americans to create the necessary conditions for a robust and solid, lasting peace. I want to commend your country. Since the first day, and even before the first day, You were part of the closest ally of Ukraine. Training the army, being here the first day to protect President Zelensky, his government, and allowing the forces just to resist, as you did decades ago with my country. And together we worked very hard during the past few years in order to stand with the Ukrainian people, just helping them to resist. We were right and we are right. And because every time Vladimir Putin's Russia advances in Ukraine, the threat moves closer to us all. We will never accept the theory that might is right. And I want to be clear. This is why, together with you, Mr. Prime Minister, we decided to launch last February this coalition of the willing you mentioned. And this coalition was just the signal that the Europeans will never abandon Ukraine. Never. And whatever the decisions could be elsewhere, we will fight till the very last minute in order to get the ceasefire, in order to start the negotiations to build this robust and sustainable peace. Because this is our security and our principles together which are at stake in Ukraine. This is the possibility of a Europe in peace. Our generation did enjoy during the past decade, which is at stake in Ukraine, nothing less. And together, we will follow up these efforts. We have also stood together in calling for the cessation of hostilities and path to peace in the Middle East, since the spiral of violence began after the terrorist attacks by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023. Together, we called for the release of all hostages. Together, we've called for a ceasefire in Gaza. It is a matter of absolute urgency to end the suffering of the hostages and of the Gazans. A war without end and without a strategic objective poses a huge threat to the region and our collective security. Today, a dehumanization is occurring there that can never be justified. Together, we are aware that a political way out is crucial, and I believe in the future of the two-state solution as a basis for regional security architecture, which will enable Israel to live in peace and security alongside its neighbors. I want to be clear. Calling today for a ceasefire in Gaza without any condition is just telling to the rest of the world that for us as Europeans, there is no double standard. And as we are attached to human lives, as we are attached to territorial integrity, we want this ceasefire. No discussion. And today, working together in order to recognize the state of Palestine and to initiate this political momentum is the only path to peace. Because since Oslo in 1993, with Gaza in ruin and West Bank being on a daily basis attacked, the perspective of a Palestinian state has never been put at risk as it is. And the objective of a recognition is not just making our duty, but this is as well reopening a political perspective and refusing just an answer based on security. And this is why the solution of the two states and the recognition of the state of Palestine is as well, according to me, the only way to build peace and stability for all in the whole region. This approach is in line with our common refusal to tolerate the threat posed by and Iran that possess nuclear weapons. There again, we know all too well the limitations of solutions based on force and the temptation to bring about regime change. France, the United Kingdom and Germany, in coordination with all stakeholders, have the duty to bring about a stringent negotiation which ensures international monitoring of Iran's nuclear program over the long term, thereby preserving the international non-proliferation framework as a foundation for collective security. It is with the same coherence and firmness that we must act to defend the world order. In Africa, our two countries have had a weighty past, which is why we can legitimately send a message of conciliation and refusal of spheres of influence, of respect for economic and territorial sovereignty. In the Indo-Pacific, our history has made us a watchdog of the freedom of navigation and compliance with international law, which we defend. Amid these upheavals, the alliance between France and the United Kingdom has not faltered. It has even become stronger. Yes, during the past few years, this alliance became stronger. On defense and security, the Lancaster House treaties showed that we were willing to cooperate on the most sensitive subjects regarding our sovereignty and our deterrence. When our two countries signed them, some clever people found a way to derive savings of resources from them, and others even dubbed them the Entente Régale. Yet, they have successfully provided structure for defense cooperation between our two countries for the past 15 years. At this bilateral summit, we will enter a new stage that will scale up this cooperation. And our two countries, the only European nuclear weapon states, the leading armed forces of the continent, together accounting for 40% of European military budgets, vow to fully shoulder the responsibility when it comes to European security. And we are faced with new threats, with aggressive nuclear powers, with sometimes hesitating alliances, and the return of major conflict on our continent. This is why, in 2 days, our summit is so important, and the announcement we prepared so historical. The capabilities identified 15 years ago at Lancaster House must be increased dramatically in proportion to the threat. Our industrial cooperation must also move to the next level, and our relation to Europe must change, even in the core of sovereignty. There is an expectation in Europe that, faced with revisionist neighbors, our two countries have a special responsibility for the security of the continent, and it is time to articulate it. And to paraphrase Pete's famous phrase, to make sure that not only our two countries will save themselves by their own exertions, but also that we will save Europe by our example and our solidarity. But we will return to this in more detail at the summit on Thursday, but very clearly, taking the commitment to go to the 3.5% on defense in the years to come. It's not just piling money, but increasing our cooperation altogether, reducing our dependencies, and building a strong European pillar in NATO. We have to work together to cooperate as we did a few years ago in Sahel, shoulder to shoulder. We have to cooperate in order to build new common programs, to increase the cooperation of our industries, and to make a more independent and stronger Europe of defense. Second, on climate and biodiversity. Together we commit to the planet in the face of the new league of international reactionaries who deny science and facts. We also defend with one voice the implementation of our climate ambitions towards carbon neutrality, phasing out fossil fuels and protecting forests, which will be core issues of the upcoming COP30 in Belém. We are also acting together to achieve the ratification of the BBNG Treaty on the protection of oceans, mobilizing the private sector, reforming the official development assistance system in line with the Paris Pact for Peoples and Planet, where we work together, And we worked very actively and still work together on biodiversity and biodiversity credits. The report we commissioned together as Franco-British during King Charles' state visit to France is not just excellent, but we endorse it and we will implement it. We will now continue to work together and implement this work. Third, on migration. And I have the feeling to be weighted on this issue as well in your country. Indeed, in this unstable world, hope for a better life elsewhere is legitimate, but we cannot allow our country's rules for taking in people to be flouted and criminal networks to cynically exploit the hopes of so many individuals with so little respect for human life. France and the United Kingdom have a shared responsibility to address irregular migration with humanity, solidarity, and firmness. The decisions that we will take at our bilateral summit will respond to our aims for cooperation and tangible results on these major issues. Very clearly, we task our Minister of Domestic Affairs to work very closely together, and I want to salute the very close coordination and cooperation. But our objective, very clearly, is to have the best ever cooperation between our two countries in order to fix today what is a burden for our two countries. But let me remind as well, as we are making these bilateral efforts, as we are stepping up the level of our cooperation, a third of the people entering illegally into the Schengen area attempt to cross the channel. And we will only arrive at a lasting and effective solution with as well the action at the European level and the cooperation, especially of the countries of first entry on the European soil, by continuing to work with the countries of departure and transit of global migration routes, and as well by addressing pull factors. But let's be clear, we will deliver together, because this issue is a clear issue for our two countries. Fourth, on economy. Our trade has been revived and has even surpassed the pre-Brexit levels. The 3,500 French companies working in the UK remains the second leading foreign employers in your country, and vice versa. And we want to do more, and at the occasion of the summit as well. We will deliver additional results, additional investment, and very strategic investment in the energy and space fields where we have long-standing cooperation, but where we want to build a new step forward and open a new era. Since the last time a French president spoke before you in 2008, Europe has changed. First of all, of course, because the sovereign British people chose to leave the European Union in 2016, a decision that we respect, even if we found it deeply regrettable. I am aware that I am the first European head of state to make a state visit since the United Kingdom left the European Union, and I take full account of the importance of this moment. It took us a few years, but we have agreed on the foundations for our new relationship. After the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement, reinforced by the Windsor framework, and some of us worked very hard on all this text. I have great memories. I support Prime Minister Starmer's efforts as well to restore trust, ensure compliance with the agreements concluded, and strengthen this framework through targeted cooperation in our common interest. I welcome the fact that on the 19th of May, we were able to define a pragmatic roadmap between the European Union and the United Kingdom on defense, energy, climate, and other issues. But just as leaving the European Union did not mean the United Kingdom left Europe, efforts to address the challenges facing all of Europe cannot be limited to the European Union alone. What is at stake today in Europe is our ability to shoulder the responsibility to ensure our continent's security ourselves to a greater extent. What is at stake today in Europe is our ability to invest in key technologies of the future. AI, quantum technologies, space, biotech, decarbonized energy sources, and defense industry, as I mentioned, in order to avoid strategic dependencies and disengagement that would put us at risk, and especially the risk of a slow death, to mention Mario Draghi. Indeed, we have to de-risk our economies and our societies, first from the risk of the lack of innovation, and this is what we experienced during the past decade if we compare our countries with the United States. But we will have as well to de-risk our two countries for the excessive dependencies on both the US and China. I do not put a sign equal between China and the US. We have a strong ally on one side and a challenger, sometimes a partner when we speak about climate change with China. But let's be realistic. If the Europeans, if the United Kingdom and France do not work together in order to build solid value chain, in order to reduce our dependencies on these critical areas I mentioned, if we still depend on both China and the US, I think we have a clear view of our future and the future of our children. On one side, overcapacities and over-subsidies are clear threats of a fair trade. And they are destabilizing a lot of value chain and creating new dependencies. On the other side, the trade war is clearly an explicit decision not to be compliant anymore with WTO and this do commerce we loved till now. We have no other choice if we want to be lucid, if we want to build a sustainable future for all children, to de-risk our economies and our societies from these dual dependencies. We want an open world. We want to cooperate, but not to depend. And each time we depend, each time we are not able to stand up and decide and agree to disagree, this is the beginning of our problem. We are in this situation. This is why we have to work very hard together on this technological and economic field in order to strengthen our value chains together and reduce these dependencies. But what is at stake as well today in Europe is the defense of democratic models amid foreign interference, information manipulation, domination of minds by negative emotions and addictions to social media. This is the big other risks. It is the same challenge we are facing when it comes to digital age, restriction online and protecting our children from social media and screens, an issue brutally brought to the light 3 months ago by the British series Adolescents. And let's be clear, this is the same type of risk. Being vulnerable to algorithm design in the US, being vulnerable to algorithm design in China, with social networks not even allowed to the Chinese teenagers. This is being vulnerable to the interferences and misinformation coming from Russia and other places. The strength of our democracies depend on our capacity to create new regulations in order to better protect our children and our democracies and our democratic debate, the relationship with science and truth. Otherwise, our future will be decided by those who will decide for this algorithm. Our two countries are among the oldest sovereign nations in Europe. And sovereignty means a lot to both of us. And everything I referred to was about sovereignty. Deciding for ourselves, choosing our technologies, our economy, deciding our diplomacy, and deciding the content we want to share, and the ideas we want to share, and the controversies we want to share. Even though it is not part of the European Union, the United Kingdom cannot stay on the sidelines, because defense and security, competitiveness, democracy, the very core of our identity, are connected across Europe as a continent. And you understand me. The point is not to diverge, and to move forward side by side on these strategic choices we are facing, to avert the risk of effacement, division, weakness. A certain idea of Europe, so dear to George Steiner, must continue to connect us today. And it is also the meaning behind the European political community, which has shown its ability to bring together the European family across the continent of Europe to address the issues of stability, security, and cooperation between states in concrete terms. And the United Kingdom is playing a full role, as it demonstrated a year ago at Blenheim Summit. I believe that our two countries will continue to be drivers of change, drivers of this wider Europe and this meaningful convergence. We must be able to count on our economic, academic, research, and cultural relations to together tackle these sovereign-related challenges. And I welcome the number of partnerships agreements that our universities, museums, research institutions will sign in the margins of this visit. They will participate in our respective agenda to reindustrialization and strategic independence in key sectors, from artificial intelligence to culture. Our two countries are leaders in Europe when we refer to artificial intelligence. But the competition of the US and China is fierce, and Europe, on this point as well, needs to step up its investments. This is why we have to work as well together. As the Channel Tunnel is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, let's make a wish here today. Let's not allow the channel to grow wider. Although there are 300,000 French people living in the United Kingdom and 150,000 British people living in France, there has been a decrease in movement in recent years when it comes to school, university, professional and researcher exchanges. And today there is a risk that our societies are growing apart, that our young people do not know each other as well and may end up strangers, at a time when international current events remind us on a daily basis of our common future. Let's fix it. Let's work together in order to facilitate the exchange of students, researchers, intellectuals, artists. This is so important. Let's allow our children to have the same opportunities as the one we had. Members of Parliament, my lords, tomorrow at the British Museum, we will officially announce an historical exchange. In the run-up to the 1000th anniversary of the birth of William the Conqueror, France will loan the United Kingdom the Bayeux Tapestry. I have to say, it took probably more years to deliver this project than all the Brexit texts. Because we launched it together with Prime Minister Theresa May at that time, during not a state visit, but a summit a few years ago. But at the end of the day, we did it.
Yeah. We seem to have lost the feed there to President Macron. We'll try to get the feedback. Let's go back.
And I think these mutual loans of these extraordinary national treasures will involve fascinating human exchanges, which will certainly be positive for our future in terms of culture. And let's see this exchange happening between summer 26 and summer 27 as the beginning of this new era of exchange and the reopening of these mutual movements. The times of William the Conqueror are over, happily. And the roles of charging cavalry as well. Our Entente Cordiale, sealed 126 years ago, has enabled our countries to bring their futures closer to protect Europe's strategic balances and to enter into an era of cooperation and competition, replacing our battlefields with football and rugby fields, as you mentioned. At the invitation of His Majesty, King Charles III, whom I should like to thank for his hospitality and his long-standing, very special relationship with my country. I came here today to renew the French people's message of friendship and fraternity. Yes, finally we meet again. And let's be sure that we will meet again for years and decades. Because we are linked by our geography, by our past, but we are linked by our common future. And the only way to overcome the challenges we have, the challenges of our times, will be to go together, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder. This is our common destiny. Long live our France, United Kingdom friendship. Long live the United Kingdom. Long live France.
And that was an historic and very widespread speech there by French President Emmanuel Macron. I see him there with getting a standing ovation from the full contents of the room. Sir Keir Starmer there on the front row, the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, Sir Ed Davey. He began by with a touch of humour. This is the place of history bygone and history in the making, the British Parliament. We regard you with respect and more than a bit of admiration. He referred to Sir Keir Starmer on the front row there as Dear Keir. Clearly his favourite person in the room. He then went on to talk about Winston Churchill. He went on to talk about Ukraine. That got the biggest round of applause, saying we will always stand up for Ukraine. We will never abandon Ukraine, never. I got the biggest round of applause at that moment. Then moved on to Palestine. I believe in the basis of a two-state solution, called for an immediate ceasefire, somewhat contrary perhaps to the British government's position, and then talked about the climate change deniers. He said reactionaries who deny science and facts. And then the moment a lot of us were waiting for, GB News, migration. In an unstable world, a hope for a better life is understandable, but we cannot allow people simply to abuse our hospitality. A shared responsibility to address irregular immigration to get tangible results. Our objective is to fix what is a burden for our two countries. We will deliver together. Perhaps the clearest indication of what may come on Thursday. He touched on Brexit. He said, a decision we respect, yet one we find deeply regrettable. Talked about USA and China almost as twin threats. We want to cooperate, but we do not want to depend. Social media should be controlled because otherwise our Chinese algorithms will decide the future of our children. Somewhat Orwellian perhaps there in his desire to clamp down on that. The European Union. The United Kingdom cannot stand on the sidelines, even though it is no longer a member. The point is not to diverge, but he talks instead of meaningful convergence. Read into that what you will. He then said on the 30th anniversary of the Channel Tunnel, let's not make the channel grow wider. Perhaps a lot of people watching this show think the channel should be wider. I digress. And then the finale. I came here to renew the French people's friendship with the United Kingdom. And everybody in the studio at this point said it was a magnificent line. He said, yes, finally we meet again. Just echoes of World War II. We are linked by geography. We are linked by our past, but mostly we are linked by our common future. He said, long live the United Kingdom. He said, long live France. And then the audience leapt to a standing ovation. I've got to say, I think it was a superbly delivered speech. Here's a guy who really knows what he's doing. Let's get some reaction from my studio guests. We all listen to that attentively. Chris Hope, GB News' political editor, Dominic Moffat's political commentator, and my studio buddy for the whole show today, Alexander Larman, historian, constitutional expert and biographer. Chris Hope, let's get to you. So much to delve into there. What leapt out to you?
Well, take a step back. That was a French president saying to the UK, where do you go from here? You've got a fork in the road. It's the challenge, I think, presented to the Prime Minister since Brexit of any colour. Do you go towards the US or Europe? Clearly, you've got there the French president saying you can't stay on the sideline. He said that in terms. He said you've got to make a choice, I think, frankly, between the UK or the US or Europe. He pointed out about trade wars. That helps nobody. A clear dig there at Donald Trump from the French president. He went across defence, climate change, migration and economy. He signalled deals to be announced on Thursday at this rather large summit between the two countries. Probably on defence, probably on energy and the like, and there might be a deal on migration, one in, one out. We talked about that for a long time now. And he also had a plea there on freedom of movement, students, intellectuals. He said we got to know each other. We can't become strangers in our own land, and that's a plea clearly for the 18th.
That actually, Chris, I've got the biggest round of applause of the entire speech. So a lot of people in that room there clearly believing still in freedom of movement, despite the fact we Brexited. I digress.
Well, Brexit gives us the freedom, Martin, to choose what to do next. And it doesn't mean there's no return to freedom of movement without any kind of limits to it. But limited freedom of movement is clearly what the government's looking at, and that could happen. Brexit, as you say there, deeply regrettable. I love that line, we will meet again for years and decades. That echoes both Vera Lynn with the famous song she sang during the Second World War, but also our late Queen, who said we will meet again, those addresses to the nation during COVID 4 years ago now. But we're linked by our common future and common destiny, marching shoulder to shoulder. I think it's an attempt here to reset this debate about France. We are the same size country by population, they're a bit bigger geographically. We're on the G7 together, we're on the Security Council together. We share so much and yet we feel so different. And here we have the French president trying to unite the two countries. It was a great speech.
Dominic Moffat, a heck of a lot of that speech revolved around defence. And in particular, one line that really leapt out was the United Kingdom and France must stand together. We must have the broadest shoulders to protect Europe. That could be very expensive.
Absolutely, and the Prime Minister has obviously made commitments around getting to 5%, I think it is, spend on defence, taking quite a broad view of what constitutes defence. We heard, echoing a lot of what the Starmer has said at the NATO conference, I think 2 weeks ago, talking about moving to more of a wartime footing for technology and industry. It was almost as though the President was briefed on Labour's missions, and I'm sure the Prime Minister will be very pleased to have seen that. It was obviously at the beginning of the 20th century that the quite elderly king coming to the throne after a very long reign of his mother launched that first kind of real flourishing of the Entente Cordiale, and I think we're seeing that again with King Charles. There was a lot of that from President Macron. It was not a speech that didn't challenge the Prime Minister, actually. I think Keir Starmer was met with significant challenges on, as you said, freedom of movement, on the kind of future relationship of the UK and the EU.
Ceasefire in Gaza.
The ceasefire in Gaza, I think, maybe most importantly.
And recognising Palestine too.
Recognising Palestine, a two-state solution.
Something that,
our government hasn't actually committed to directly. And
against much challenge from Labour backbenchers, despite Keir Starmer having previously, before government, having committed to recognise Palestine. It was a very avowed expression of a critique of America as well, of American cultural hegemony, something that you would expect to see, I think, from the French. That's not a surprise at all.
OK, Alexander Lohman, a huge amount to digest there. What leapt out for you?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I mean, I've always rather admired Macron, not so much in terms of his policies, but as a performer. And what's amazing is you're watching a speech like that, entirely delivered in English, and he comes across so well. I mean, he has a charisma which is entirely lacking from anyone in the British politics at the moment. I mean, you've got to go back to Tony Blair, really, to see somebody who is that fluent, who is that capable in that kind of situation. But what I also enjoyed is that Macron sees himself as an intellectual, hence we have these allusions to Locke, allusions to Montesquieu, and there's a very good line about the monarchy as well, because obviously he is a man coming forward and saying, we love the monarchy, but we don't want it at home. So it was a very well-judged speech from a pacing perspective, from a delivery perspective. I mean, there's a lot of very chewy content there, some of which I expect we're going to get more details from tomorrow, some of which I think actually could linger on for years. But what we have to remember with Macron is he's thinking about his legacy. He's thinking about, can Ukraine be resolved before 2027? Because if so, and if he is seen as responsible for brokering peace, his legacy is going to be far, far better than it currently is. And if he doesn't, it's going to be very difficult to see what his legacy is going to be.
Chris Hope, you can see Sir Keir Starmer there on the front row, can hardly contain his admiration for Emmanuel Macron. Look at him, it's a total bromance. He's absolutely in love with the guy. Kemi Badenoch there, I think she powdered her teeth when Emmanuel Macron said, "Dear Keir," clearly his favourite.
Which is the same language used by Ursula von der Leyen. They do say "Dear Keir," the European partners.
That's their term of endearment. But Chris, a lot of political gauntlets, in a sense, thrown down there to Sir Keir Starmer. A lot of them aren't British policy.
Well, yes, in particular, recognising Palestine. That was what would get on with it. No, why hang around? And the left of the Labour Party will be looking at it going, yeah, why are you not doing this properly, Sir Keir Starmer? We'll see if that's picked up tomorrow in Prime Minister's Questions live on GB News, of course, as ever. But I think the general tone was one of what's your future, Britain? Challenge this country. Do you want to go towards the US? And of course, we have Donald Trump here in September, or do you want to come to your closest friends and we can walk shoulder to shoulder together? He mentioned the Bayeux Tapestry. Took us long to negotiate that deal, going back to Theresa May's time as Prime Minister in 2017, as getting the Brexit deal done. So he looked a bit wounded. It took a while to agree that.
And the next stop in this day will be to move towards Parliament Square. Of course, the totemic statue of Sir Winston Churchill, hunched, cowering, dominating the airwaves.
Looking at Parliament.
And he referred to Sir Winston Churchill in that speech there. He called him one of the visionaries. But he did say he created the European order of which he loved. Again, I think a little dig towards European unity. He talked a lot about the return of war to our continent. And I wonder, actually, Dominic Moffat, just kind of summing up, it felt to me like this is the time for France, for the UK to join up, to, in a sense, shake off the shackles of the United States, to go it alone in Europe. No mention of Germany, no mention of any other nation states in the European Union. Macron acting the de facto president of Europe.
Absolutely, and this, I think, is an avowed statement that that President Macron sees the UK and France as propelling the European Union back into a post-1945 world where France and the United Kingdom can rewrite a world order, even maybe 1918, when the US stepped far further back than it did in 1945. 45. Interestingly, on immigration, he used a lot of very progressive language, some of which I think was quite challenging to Keir Starmer. Actually, Keir Starmer normally talks about immigration now in quite a critical way, in a way that probably trying to appeal more to reform voters. But he used words about shared humanity, of fairness, very different to the kind of the calling back to Enoch Powell that we saw from the Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago.
He also said that only a third of those entering Schengen want to cross the channel, intimating that if two-thirds don't, we must deliver together. Final word for this session, if I could, to you, Alexander Lorman. It's all very well for President Macron to act like the president of Europe, but in 2 years' time, he might not even be the president of France.
Well, precisely. I mean, 2 years' time, he's gone. And, of course, we don't know what's going to happen in France because, obviously, there is a far-right party waiting to take over. And given that, at the moment, it's very hard to say what Macron actually stands for because he came into power on a centrist platform. But now it just seems amorphous, doesn't it? It seems to have spread out from the centre to be covering as much of politics as he can. But certainly he's concentrating on the international legacy. He knows the domestic legacy is done. He knows that his own country hate him. Those statistics you were reading out earlier suggest that 3/4 of France have no interest whatsoever in Macron as president. So he knows that what he has to do is he has to find some sort of solution in Ukraine, which he wants to be seen as responsible for, because that's about posterity. He's thinking he's a legacy man. He's thinking about what's coming next.
Posterity, posturing, passion. It was textbook Emmanuel Macron. Let's be absolutely frank, but I've got to say, a lot to think about, a lot to discuss. Gentlemen, it's been an epic session. Thank you very much. Alexander Lorman, Dominic Moffat, and, of course, Chris Hope. Superb as ever, gentlemen. As we wait, Emmanuel Macron moving over now towards that statue of Sir Winston Churchill to lay a wreath. We'll turn to the news. It's been a long time. Into your latest news bulletins, your headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. Just after 5:30, the top story tonight. Emmanuel Macron has delivered a historic speech in London, urging renewed unity between the UK and France to protect global order. Addressing both houses of Parliament, he praised the brotherhood of arms that links the nations and declared Europeans will never abandon Ukraine. Meanwhile, wildfires are ravaging in south of France as around 200 firefighters are battling a blaze near Marseille. The city's airport has been forced to close. No casualties have been reported, but flights are being diverted as authorities continue to manage the emergency. Breaking tonight, Greg Wallace has reportedly been sacked from MasterChef after an independent inquiry into misconduct allegations. That decision comes as 50 new claims have emerged, including accusations he groped colleagues and exposed himself to junior staff. He denies the allegations. Tragedy at an Italian airport where a 35-year-old man has died after running onto the tarmac and being sucked into a plane engine. Police say the man was not a passenger or staff member and entered the terminal in a disturbing turn of events. And digital bank Monzo has been hit with £20 million of fines after failing to verify customer addresses. It allowed accounts to be opened with fake details, including Downing Street and Buckingham Palace. Monzo says the issue is now resolved, but the damage has been done. Those are the headlines for now. More news at 6.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny and warm out there for many of us today, but it is turning cloudier from the northwest, leading to some damp weather for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland later. That's because of these weak weather fronts that are pushing in over the top of an area of high pressure, and it's that high pressure that is going to increasingly dominate the weather across the UK during the rest of the week. That's led to plenty of clear skies through the day, and we keep those clear skies through the Midlands, eastern and southern England, as well as East Wales overnight. But elsewhere, thicker cloud rolls in, and that cloud producing some spots of rain for the north and west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and northwest England. Keeping the temperatures mild, 14 or 15 Celsius under the cloud.
cooler towards the southeast, but that's where we'll see the best of the sunshine first thing Wednesday. Meanwhile, it's a gloomy start to the day for the north and west of Scotland. Light rain and drizzle here, especially for western coasts and hills. Northern Ireland, likewise, the north seeing spells of rain and drizzle first thing. Nothing particularly heavy, but it's going to be a damp and gloomy start. North Wales, similar, but the cloud more patchy across the north and west of England. And for the southeast, it's sunny skies. That will help the temperatures rise through the morning. It's going to be a warm day. But for much of England and Wales, as well as eastern Scotland, it does turn brighter. The cloud thins and breaks into the afternoon. I think we'll keep the thick, low cloud for the north and west of Scotland, some drizzle remaining into the afternoon here, keeping temperatures at 17 or 18 Celsius. But under the sunshine elsewhere, mid to even the high 20s are possible. So a very warm day to come for many, and it's going to turn even warmer during the next few days, with high pressure building widely, pushing weather fronts well to the north, widespread sunny skies developing by the start of the weekend. And watch how those temperatures rise. It's not just the south, but further north as well.
Westminster, the ultimate clique. And you're fighting like rats in a sack. But here on the Camilla Tominey Show, we ask the questions the establishment media is too scared to ask. OK, let me ask you a straight question, because I know you're a straight-talking politician. Whether it's net zero, illegal immigration or law and order, nothing is off limits. You had the power then.
Yeah, as I
and
say,
now you've lost it. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show that's fearless. But no, let me finish my question if you don't mind, because it is my show. Sundays at 9:30, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There, you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Cross. Welcome back. Your time is 5:37. You're with me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, we can now speak with the former royal editor at The Sun, and that, of course, is Duncan Larkham. Duncan, welcome to the show. We've been covering the entire speech, the whole visit by Emmanuel Macron all day. We just had a very in-depth, very expansive speech in Parliament. Now, of course, all eyes on this dinner this evening, and in particular, the speech we're expecting King Charles to give. Has to be said, Duncan, a lot of people have been quite critical of the King for saying there should be no borders between Britain and France, at a time where a lot of people believe there should be increased borders between Britain and France. Is the King getting too political?
Hi, Martin. I think some people might well have that view. It kind of flies in the face of those that voted for Brexit, and they wanted stronger barriers, frankly, between the countries. But King Charles needs to stay out of politics, so I think it will be very interesting, as you say, to see what he says, and possibly we may well see him open himself up for some quite severe criticism in the morning.
And do you think that's already, in a sense, too late? Is the genie out of the bottle? The role of the King is meant to be avowedly apolitical, but, you know, the King has been political on things like climate change, on asylum in the past, and even the Prime Minister himself, who's hardly a rampant Brexiteer, is hoping to get a beefed-up immigration deal with Emmanuel Macron. And even Keir Starmer won't be agreeing at the moment with the concept of no borders between Britain and France.
No, what's particularly interesting about it, really, is the fact that these visits only take place because of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. It's the government that invites Macron, not the King. The King effectively does as he's told and hosts whoever he's told to host. So I think, you know, perhaps the genie is already out of the bottle and he has overstepped the mark. I think that's probably, your opinion on that will depend on how strong a Brexiteer you were as opposed to a Remainer. But there is this sort of fear, and it is a political hot potato, that Keir Starmer has been criticised for perhaps trying to rebuild some of the ties to the EU, which slaps in the face of those that voted for Brexit. And so, yeah, very dangerous territory for the king, and quite an interesting choice of a topic to address. I mean, he has plenty. He could talk about the Bayeux Tapestry coming to Britain. He could talk about his 36 visits to France. He didn't need to necessarily say this. So it will be interesting to know if Keir Starmer sanctioned it in advance.
And yet, Duncan Larkham, we heard there President Macron talking expansively himself about a desire for closer integration, of greater action. We've got some live pictures on our screens now just to fill you in if you're listening on the radio. It is of Emmanuel Macron with Sir Keir Starmer and Lady Starmer there, and of course Brigitte Macron, Emmanuel Macron's wife, just about to cross the road, that is there, just outside the Palace of Westminster Parliament. And they're going to go over the other side of the road, directly over that way as they approach now, is that statue of Sir Winston Churchill. Of course, anybody who's been to Parliament Square will be well aware of this. The next stage of this visit is to lay that wreath at the base of that statue. And Duncan Larkham, as we still have you here, it is a hugely important part of any royal visit, and particularly with the politics as they are, for a president to be paying their respects here to Sir Winston Churchill.
Absolutely. I mean, Winston Churchill, you could argue if it hadn't been for the role he played in the Second World War, France would have been occupied by Germany for a lot longer. So I think it's a nice thing to see the French leader showing his gratitude to Britain for the role that our forces played in liberating his country back in 1945.
And Duncan Larkham, without getting too political, hey, I try not to, do you think the French have ever been truly great? I think you mentioned a great point there, Duncan Larkham. We just saw there pictures of Emmanuel Macron laying that wreath. Again, it's a beautiful wreath, similar one to we saw him lay inside Westminster Abbey there at the grave of the unknown soldier. Beautiful red, white and blue foliage. Do you think that the French have ever been truly grateful for Winston Churchill's work? And of course, that of America or President Eisenhower. I think you're absolutely right. If D-Day hadn't happened, Sir Keir Starmer now laying his wreath at the foot of Winston Churchill. If Churchill and Eisenhower hadn't intervened, as you said, France may well be speaking German.
Well, that's a fact, isn't it, really? I mean, as much as it's hypothetical, but France unfortunately fell to the hands of the Nazis, and it was the British and Allied troops in America and the Commonwealth troops that turned that around. I think this is a really nice gesture. You asked me whether I want to answer the controversial question of are the French grateful enough? I think many people might say that they're not, and the relations between France and England isn't always rosy and hasn't been, whether Macron realises that or not. But I think this for me personally, I think is a really good addition to this big state visit to Britain.
Who can fail to be moved by the sound of the last post sounding out on the bugle? Just internationally, historically, will never cease to move. I think it's fair to say Emmanuel Macron there, Lady Starmer, you can see in vision, united, politics to one side, and shared bond of brotherhood, of war. Emmanuel Macron spoke very movingly of that himself in the chamber earlier on. Some things bigger than politics. Truly are. It's always so moving. I've seen it so many times. Alexander Lohman, I've heard the last bugle so many times, the last post so many times. It always chokes me up.
Yes, I mean, it's been a very moving day, actually. I mean, a few moments ago, President Macron was channeling Vera Lynn with his talk about we'll meet again, and now you've got the last post. And it's genuinely affecting, because things like this you take rather in your stride because you think, oh, it's another state visit being done for political ends. But you can't help remember that 80 years ago, VE Day is just behind us, but it was the conflict had seen so many people die from both of our great countries, from so many nationalities. And the fact that Winston Churchill was the man.
And just if you're listening in, that is, of course, the French national anthem blaring out. Let's take a listen. The French national anthem, and now, of course, the British national anthem. Emmanuel Macron, Brigitte Macron, Sir Keir Starmer and Lady Starmer beneath the totemic statue of Sir Winston Churchill, having laid their wreaths, and the respective anthems, national anthems of France and the United Kingdom blaring out in the sunshine outside Parliament. A magnificent sight. Stick with us. We'll be back soon.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/your say. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/your say, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Poll, it doesn't surprise either Bev or I, shows that most Brits believe that Britain is in decline. 76% of us, though, did surprise. We fear political unrest and even violence.
And those fears come amid violent riots, of course, in Ballymena in Northern Ireland. They've left dozens of police officers injured and the area largely destroyed in some cases, particularly the local leisure centre.
Let's talk to our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, this report comes on the back of sustained riots over, 6 days in the province?
They are putting undocumented immigrants into areas of high deprivation. There is a group here called Mears. 85% of their properties are in socially deprived areas, and those areas are now kicking back, because in amongst those areas you have pensioners and so forth that have bought their houses back in the 80s. I spoke to a couple of them that were having to be moved out by their grandchildren.
We know that people are not happy with. I think first thing to say is that people are worried about their living standards. They think they've declined, and actually strikingly, in a different part of the survey we found that 4 in 10 people feel like they were worse off since the COVID pandemic. That was actually particularly pronounced amongst reform voters, but overall people are very pessimistic about their personal finances and their cost of living. So I think that's a huge driver. We also know that people aren't happy with the government's handling of immigration, and actually going back to that question about what's affecting people's living standards, which I think is a much better way of getting at how people are feeling about things like the economy. People perceive, including Labour voters, including a sizable chunk of Labour voters, that immigration has had a negative impact on their living standards. And I do think we're starting to see that filter through into pessimism about the country as a whole.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. It's been an historic day. Emmanuel Macron just laid that wreath there at the statue of Winston Churchill. I'm still joined in the studio by the constitutional expert, the author, the biographer, the historian, Alexander Lorman. Alexander, all eyes now back towards Buckingham Palace. The next stage of the trip, they're going to go back towards Buckingham Palace. They'll be getting in the royal helicopter and, of course, going back to Windsor Castle for that hugely anticipated buffet this evening.
Well, it's going to be interesting, Martin, to see exactly how they follow that speech of Macron's, because there's going to be two more speeches later, one by the French president and one by the king. And obviously the king's speech has been widely trailed already. There's always talk about open borders and nothing dividing France and Britain. And, of course, in the context of Macron's speech, that now makes more sense, doesn't it? Because it's a response to that. And, of course, that reminds us that Charles is the most political of monarchs. And I don't know to what extent it's all been coordinated together, the idea that his office would have had sight of Macron speech, so he has his speech responding to it. But you start to think, where's our Prime Minister in all of this? Because he seems a rather diminished figure today in comparison to Macron and to the King. So the stakes are relatively high.
Apart from no borders on the menu, as it were, speech-wise, do we have any clue about what they might be tucking into? Normally they have a fine spread. I'd hope, just one hope, Alexander Lorman, that everything on the menu is British.
Well, Martin, I think it should be British, shouldn't it? Because if they're not doing the finest of British cuisine, you start off with some sparkling wine, hopefully actually made in Kent rather than in France, rather than champagne, none of that foreign muck here. And then some really good British cheese, a fine Wensleydale, a good stinking bishop, perhaps. That's how it ought to be.
And I think all eyes there. We can see pictures from earlier on in the day. That was Emmanuel Macron at Windsor Castle with the King earlier. As I say, they'll be making their way now from the Winston Churchill statue back into one of our royal carriages, back down the Mall, back to Buckingham Palace, into the royal helicopter, and whirling their way back to Windsor Castle for this hugely anticipated speech. Quick moment to finish on Alexander Lorman. How successful do you think today has been? Who was the real winner?
Well, at the moment, it's looking like Macron's the winner because he's done this widely acclaimed speech to both houses of Parliament. He looked statesmanlike. He's been hosted by the King. He's about to go and have this banquet. I mean, this is not doing his international reputation any harm whatsoever.
And yet, of course, domestically, not exactly rosy for President Macron, but undeniably a star-spangled speech, expansive, Brexit, European Union, Ukraine, Gaza, ceasefire, two-state solution for Palestine, censorship, the internet, Donald Trump. It was truly expansive. Now all eyes on the King's speech. Has he put his foot in it? Talking about no borders with France, no borders with the UK at a time, I think, when a lot of people, certainly watching this channel, are hoping that borders may be strengthened. Thank you for tuning in to this special edition of the Martin Daubney Show. Alexander Lorman, thank you very much for joining me in the studio now. Pass on to our very own queen, the royalty that is Jubes & Co.
Thank you very much for that, Martin. Great show, as always. Well, look, am I the only person that's not actually been overly excited by this state visit today? I've actually found it a little bit ludicrous that it's taking place at this point in time when you've got the goings-on in the channel. I also, though, want to talk tonight about law and order in this country. We know that the criminal justice system is broken. What's the answer, then? We've got the sentencing bill coming out this week. I've got to tell you, it has some things that certainly raise my eyebrows, and they might raise yours. We'll get into all of that that and more in a sec.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny and warm out there for many of us today, but it is turning cloudier from the northwest, leading to some damp weather for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland later. That's because of these weak weather fronts that are pushing in over the top of an area of high pressure, and it's that high pressure that is going to increasingly dominate the weather across the UK during the rest of the week. That's led to plenty of clear skies through the day, and we keep those clear skies through the Midlands, eastern and southern England, as well as East Wales overnight. But elsewhere, thicker cloud rolls in, and that cloud producing some spots of rain for the north and west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, north west England. Keeping the temperatures mild, 14 or 15 Celsius under the cloud, cooler towards the southeast, but that's where we'll see the best of the sunshine first thing Wednesday. Meanwhile, it's a gloomy start to the day for the north and west of Scotland. Light rain and drizzle here, especially for western coasts and hills. Northern Ireland, likewise, the north seeing spells of rain and drizzle first thing. Nothing particularly heavy, but it's going to be a damp and gloomy start. North Wales, similar, but the cloud more patchy across the north and west of England. And for the southeast, it's sunny skies. That will help the temperatures rise through the morning. It's going to be a warm day. But for much of England and Wales, as well as eastern Scotland, it does turn brighter. The cloud thins and breaks into the afternoon. I think we'll keep the thick, low cloud for the north and west of Scotland, some drizzle remaining into the afternoon here, keeping temperatures at 17 or 18 Celsius. But under the sunshine elsewhere, mid to even the high are possible. So a very warm day to come for many, and it's going to turn even warmer during the next few days, with high pressure building widely, pushing weather fronts well to the north, widespread sunny skies developing by the start of the weekend. And watch how those temperatures rise. It's not just the south, but further north as well.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good evening. This is the latest AI travel news from GBNews.com. Delays are reported on the M60 anti-clockwise between Junction 4 and Junction 1 due to congestion. Drivers can expect delays of around 20 minutes. Motorists on the A92 heading northbound at Chapel should allow extra travel time due to a broken down vehicle. In Essex, on the M11 northbound between Junction 6 and Junction 7, expect significant delays because of a traffic collision, with one lane out of 3 closed. And on the trains, Avanti West Coast services are disrupted between Carlisle and Glasgow Central and Edinburgh. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Imagine having an extra £1,000 to spend each week for an entire year. 54,320